Welcome to today's Police and Crime Committee meeting. We will be holding our monthly question and answer session with the Mayor's Office for Policing and Crime and the Metropolitan Police Service. Please make sure that your electronic devices are switched to silent mode to avoid any interruptions. Can I now ask our clerk, Lauren Harvey, if any apologies have been received?
Thank you, Chairman. Apologies have been received from Assembly Member Moema and Assembly Member Prince, for whom Assembly Member Best is attending as a substitute.
Thank you, Lauren. Can I ask the committee to note the recommendations set out at item 2 and ask if members have any other interests to declare? Noted. Thank you. Can we confirm the minutes of the meeting held on the 25th of January 2022 to be signed by me as a correct record? Thank you. Can we note the ongoing and closed actions arising from previous meetings of the committee? Noted. Thank you. So we now move on to our main item of business, which is the question and answer with MOPAC and the Metropolitan Police. And I'd like to welcome our guests. We have Sophie Linden, Deputy Mayor for Policing and Crime, Sir Stephen House, QPM, Deputy Commissioner of the MPS. And for the second section of our questioning, thank you very much for joining us. It's Commander Kevin Southwood, Head of Profession for Public Protection of the MPS. And I'm sure you won't mind just not answering the questions till the last part, which is your expertise. And thank you for attending. Before I start on the listed questions we have, to start with, Assembly Member Duval would like to ask a quick question.
Thank you very much, Chair. Could I just ask about where we are on the Morgan inquiry? I understand that MOPAC have decided not to pursue a complaint against the Commissioner because it doesn't reach the threshold. My further understanding is that IOPC are still considering or have considered whether they are. The reason why I'm asking is that there was business that we were awaiting on because it was delayed by that complaint. Equally, if the Deputy Commissioner could explain to us when are we likely to see the MPS's response to the inquiry?
Thank you. My understanding is that the IOPC are still considering. Effectively, they are looking through what everybody knows is an extremely long report. They're still reading through it to identify if there are any misconduct issues for any officers. And I think that's the last I heard, which was I think just last week. That's still underway. In terms of our response, we sent a preliminary or intermediate response to the Home Secretary and to the Mayor. January, I think it was, and we're expecting to have a complete response at some point in March, and that's a pretty firm deadline.
Look, the Commissioner has always been willing to face us in terms of these questions. Would she be willing to refer herself then to the IOPC if that's going to be the case? Because we are on a timescale here, because the Commissioner is resigning. There is a date to be discussed when she goes. And I think this committee would like to hear her response to the issues and the criticisms raised by the family and the inquiry in terms of her particular role in her previous roles, not as Commissioner, but in her roles in terms of why the investigation was on. Yeah, it's right that she should be able to defend herself, but equally it's right that she faces some of the questions the family have raised, as well as members of the inquiry.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. I'm sure that the Commissioner, who's never been backwards in fighting her views on this one, would be very happy if she has the opportunity to. We are in a collapsing time frame, I have to say, but I'm sure if she has the opportunity, once we think we can, and she may have to talk to the IOPC about what she can say and when she can say it.
Chair, would you consider writing on behalf of the committee to the IOPC and asking them, explaining the background and our concerns about the potential time it's taking for them to come to a decision whether they think it's appropriate to investigate the Commissioner in terms of regarding these matters?
Yes, I'd be happy to do that. I'll write to Michael Lockwood, who heads it up, and see if we can get a response on that. Actually, while you've mentioned the Commissioner resigning, I'll be honest, I've had quite a bit of correspondence from frontline officers. All of us have heard what the Met Fed have had to say about the Commissioner leaving, I think it's appropriate we ask our Deputy Commissioner, would you like to comment on the Commissioner going?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I would. I'll begin by saying it's been an extremely difficult couple of weeks for the Metropolitan Police Service, and I can understand that people in this room and many Londoners will have questions, and I hope that I'll be able to address some of those in what I'm about to say. But first, I'd like to reassure everyone listening to this that the mission of the Metropolitan Police Service remains clear and steadfast. As I speak, thousands of officers are at the heart of communities they serve, working to identify and to catch offenders, keeping people safe and building confidence in us as a trusted public service. On the Commissioner's decision to step aside, I wish to start by saying that I completely and utterly sign up to and believe in the fact that Chief Constables and Commissioners must be held accountable by elected politicians. Quite self-evidently, it's a cornerstone of British democracy. But this must also be accompanied by a full-hearted respect for the operational independence of Chief Police Officers. This balance is also essential for democracy. So in terms of my position and how I feel about this today, firstly, I feel deeply disappointed. There's a clear procedure in statute laid down to allow the removal of a police chief officer. It's not been followed in this instance. It's not even been initiated in this instance. Due process has not been followed, and instead we've seen matters played out in the media. Because of this, I've written to the Home Secretary to ask her to have a review carried out of the events that have taken place. And I would ask you, members of the Police and Crime Committee, whether or not you would like to look at what's happened here as well. As well as feeling deeply disappointed, I'm very surprised. Many of us are. Only a few months ago, the Mayor was a strong advocate for a 3-year extension for this Commissioner. Of course, I know that the indefensible messages exchanged by some police officers in Charing Cross Police Station have had an extremely powerful and toxic effect. I and my colleagues have read the content of those texts and been disgusted, as any right-thinking person would be, by the content of them. We are all committed to rebuilding trust in the Met, and we entirely recognise that this has been affected by this and other shocking events and cases. Yet the text messages in the Charing Cross case cannot have been a surprise to this Mayor. MOPAC have been briefed on these events, and they had been under investigation for 4 years. And only a few weeks ago, the Mayor was a vocal supporter of the Commissioner in a tripartite meeting with the Home Secretary. Hence my surprise at what's happened. Finally, I feel extremely sad. I feel sad for my boss that her police career and lifetime of public service has ended in this way, and I know that I'm not alone in feeling this. I and we fully accept the grave impact of recent events. All the decent people in the Met, and that's the vast majority, recognise that we have much to do to root out those amongst us with abhorrent and unacceptable views. I am determined that we will do that. The fact remains that everyday officers and staff serve the people of London with courage, compassion, professionalism and integrity. And I'm extremely proud of how they are delivering on the Commissioner's #1 priority of bearing down on violence. Violence in London is down, with thousands of fewer robbery victims, knife crime victims and shooting victims, and record seizures of firearms. I'm also proud of how we police extremely challenging and highly charged public order events with robust fairness, respecting the rights of people to protest when they do so in a lawful manner, while balancing the demands of Londoners to get on with their lives. I know our counter-terrorism capability continues to lead the world despite ever-evolving threat and risk of attack, and our work on dismantling county lines and bringing offenders to justice and rescuing those enslaved by the line holders is now adopted nationally as good practice. Earlier this week, I saw the results of the most recent survey carried out not by the Met but by MOPAC on behalf of the Mayor, that shows that 3/4 of Londoners, 75%, continue to trust the Metropolitan Police Service, and that is despite all the current and very real challenges which we know we face. Much of that trust, I believe, is because the public look beyond the headlines at the daily actions of our men and women. I would pay tribute here today, as I do on every such occasion, to those men and women. I have absolutely no doubt that their job has been made more difficult by recent events. I've heard that some people feel the Commissioner does not understand the seriousness of the situation that faces the Met. This is simply not true, and is not a view that is supported in any way by the facts. One simply has to look at the activities she has personally initiated since these issues came to light, to see her steely determination to confront those who fall short of our high standards. But my final feeling is of sadness for London. The Met has served the city for almost 200 years. Scotland Yard remains world-renowned for its investigative excellence. Our contribution to London goes far beyond pursuing criminals and maintaining the Queen's peace. Under this Commissioner, we have increasingly been seen as an anchor institution as London has gone through some very turbulent years. But it is this city, its people and its visitors who've been deprived of the outstanding police officer of her generation. I have never worked with a finer, more ethical, more professional, more resolute and dutiful and more caring leader. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for those words. I'm actually pleased that you mentioned the things that are going right. The problem is the media picks up on things that are wrong. And to be fair, that's the job of this committee as well. We look for things that might not be going as they should do, because that is our job. But we must never lose sight of the fact that there are tens of thousands of officers out there doing their very best and doing very well every day. I'm going to start, if you're very quick.
Very quick. I agree with every word you just said, Chair. Can I ask the Deputy Mayor, we don't want this he said, she said correspondence going. Would you publish the correspondence of the days before the Commissioner announced that she was departing?
Thank you, Chair. I was going to ask for the ability to respond to some of what the Deputy Commissioner has said. It was clear after the publication of the Operation Hotton report by the IOPC into the goings-on and the culture into the investigation into the culture of the police station at Charing Cross. It was clear to the Mayor that something quite serious was going on in the Metropolitan Police in terms of the culture of the Met. It was very clear in the IOPC investigation itself, they made it very clear that this wasn't the case, and I quote, of bad apples. It wasn't a case that this was historic, it wasn't isolated, and they also talked about within the report around systematic cultural issues within the Metropolitan Police, not just at Charing Cross, but that they have found as a result of other investigations following Charing Cross, what's been happening at Charing Cross Police Station. I'm not going to go into the ins and outs, and you're right, Assembly Member Devonish, I don't think it will help anything to go into the he said, you said over the last couple of weeks. The Mayor was very clear to the Commissioner in a meeting that was held at Union Street as to the seriousness of the situation, and he asked her to come forward with an urgent and comprehensive plan as to how she was going to put the house in order within the Metropolitan Police, but also, very, very importantly, would restore the trust and confidence of Londoners. This isn't just the case of a few headlines and media reports. When you look at the public attitudes survey that MOPAC undertakes, which is a very comprehensive survey of over 12,000 Londoners taken on a quarterly basis, 51% of Londoners said they did not have confidence in the Metropolitan Police. Now that is that has plummeted since 2017. Since 2017, it was 68%, it's 51% now on confidence. The other thing that you can see within the public attitude survey is the gap between black Londoners, LGBT plus Londoners, and mixed Londoners, as it's called within the public attitude survey, where for some of those categories, it's below 50% have trust and confidence in the Metropolitan Police. It was clear to the Mayor that urgent action needed to be taken. Through the discussions and the follow-up correspondence from the Commissioner, the Mayor was very clear that he was not satisfied with the scale, the urgency, and the scale and urgency of the response. Two particular things were not right. One of which was an acceptance of the scale of the problem within the Metropolitan Police, but also a comprehensive plan to re-establish trust and confidence in Londoners. I believe the Metropolitan Police has already published some of the correspondence on their website, and of course we'll look to see what should become public, and we'll look at that as answer to your question.
You'll come back to us with the correspondence.
We will. The Metropolitan Police has already published the plan that the Commissioner sent to the Mayor, and we will look if there's any other correspondence where it would be appropriate to publish.
Well, I think we need to look into this further. Clearly, there are disagreements on those figures that you're giving. and it's unsatisfactory all the way around, but I think we'll start our questioning on Hotton now, and we'll look to go into this further another time. If I can start, I'll start with you, Deputy Commissioner. What is your response to the Operation Hotton report, and do you accept all of the recommendations?
Thank you, Chair. We are still within the statutory time frame of when we respond to the IOPC. It's the 25th of March is that deadline. But I wouldn't want anyone to have the idea that we are resistant to the recommendations. That's not true. We are simply working through them, and we'll respond in detail fully to the IOPC. I don't think, with all due respect to this committee, the IOPC would appreciate me going into detail at this point in time. But I can assure you we're not fighting against these recommendations. Anyone who looked at Hotton and looked at the correspondence on WhatsApp between some of the officers was disgusted, as I was, and as all right-thinking people in the Met were.
Can I ask you, was it between lots of officers, or was it particularly just between 2 officers?
There were 14 officers who were investigated in total by the IOPC, and they were looked at under 39 different instances of misconduct. Of the 14 officers, 5 are no longer in the Metropolitan Police Service, 3 resigned, and 2 were dismissed as a result of the investigation. So 9 officers remain within the Metropolitan Police Service. There's been a lot of discussion and calls for all of these officers to be sacked, but the reality of the situation is that where the officers did not face a misconduct or a gross misconduct hearing, many of them were found to have no case to answer by the IOPC. This was an independent investigation run entirely by the Independent Office of Police Conduct. And they decided that officers had no case to answer. So calls to the Commissioner to sack officers who an independent investigation have found have no case to answer in relation to these allegations would be a breach of any natural justice.
Yeah, I'm glad you cleared that up, because I've heard that a lot and it just doesn't seem right at all. And would you like to confirm that you can't sack people anyway? Doesn't that have to go through the IOPC, not like a normal employer, as it were?
So the way this works is the IOPC will investigate. They will then make a recommendation as to what should happen to the officer, and if that is either misconduct or gross misconduct, the officers will face a hearing. For a misconduct hearing, the option to the panel of sacking or asking the officer to resign does not exist for misconduct. But for gross misconduct, there is a sanction of dismissal or requiring to resign. So the IOPC will set the pace, as it were, as an independent body by effectively telling the panel what the sanctions available are. And that's what happened in this case. And as I say, for most of the officers, it was no case to answer, or there was minor learning, which was looked at as something like sit down with a senior officer, discuss what happened, and make sure they fully understand what they did and didn't do and what was wrong about what they did or didn't do. But these are not sanctions handed out by the Metropolitan Police Service or by the Commissioner. It's by the IOPC.
Yeah, and yet these officers have had their names smeared quite badly. Do you have any comment to make on that, Deputy Mayor?
I think in terms of the findings of the IOPC and the Operation Hotton report, I mean, it's been very clear what the Mayor and myself's reaction has been to that. And I'm sure it was the same for everybody around this table, and it is the same for a lot of Londoners. And I must say, it will be the same for the vast majority of police officers who are, as the Deputy Commissioner has already pointed out, serving London to the best of their ability. And we thank them for that. We genuinely thank them for that, because we know there are many, many brave and dedicated officers, many of whom I have met and have, over the years of being Deputy Mayor, have had the privilege of meeting and discussing their work with, as well as going out on patrol. However, what was found in the report from the IOPC into the WhatsApp messages and the bullying and harassment that took place in Charing Cross Police Station was shocking. The WhatsApp messages were disgusting and shocking, and really will have absolutely and did shock Londoners, as it did myself and the Mayor. In terms of what has happened to those police officers that were part of those WhatsApp group and part of the investigation, it is a matter of fact that has been laid out by the Mayor as to what, that some of them, 9 of the officers, are still serving in the Metropolitan Police. That is a matter of fact, and it is not wrong for Londoners to seek an explanation as to how that can be, because these shocking details of what happened during the course of the investigation that the IOPC has uncovered need proper explanation, and we need to ensure that those officers that remain serving in the Metropolitan Police are fit and proper to do so, and I don't think that is anything that we need to apologise for, or there is any wrongdoing in pointing out the fact of what has happened since the IOPC, since the investigation and the misconduct proceedings.
Well, if the independent office for policing says that they didn't have anything to answer for, are you saying the IOPC are wrong then? Is that what you're saying?
It's a matter of fact that 9 of the officers that were part of the investigation are still serving in the Metropolitan Police. It is right to question as to how that can be. If it is a matter of the regulations and the way in which the decisions are taken, that needs to be questioned. We must make sure that those officers that serve within the Metropolitan Police, because it is such an important task to protect Londoners, that their ethics and standards and values are those that we expect to have within the Metropolitan Police.
I hear what you say, but even so, I think if people have been shown that there's nothing wrong with what they've done, they have nothing to answer to be hounded in this way or been put in this position, I think all of us would say natural justice is not taking part. And I think we should be very careful what we say, because the media pick it up and instantly everybody assumes they're all as guilty as each other, which is clearly not the issue. I'll move on, but I'm quite disgusted with the way this has been handled, quite frankly.
I must say that it's a statement of fact and of what has happened. I really find it, I'm not really sure how you can be disgusted at that. This is a statement of fact of what has happened to those officers that were part of the investigation.
Who have been cleared.
Just because you're part of an investigation doesn't mean you're guilty.
Yeah. Your comment?
I'll merely go back to the fact that what has happened to those police officers since they were part of the investigation is a statement of fact that Londoners deserve an explanation as to how and why those officers are still serving, and 2 of whom have been promoted. Now, that is a perfectly legitimate question to be asked. If it is a matter of the regulations that the IOPC or the Metropolitan Police operate under, those regulations need to be properly looked at and probably be reviewed and changed.
Right. So I'm going to move on, but I would just say natural justice to you, Deputy Mayor, and I do feel those officers are certainly not getting it. I'm sure we'll come back to this at another stage, but I'm really quite livid by this. I think it's grossly unfair to start making these accusations against people who have been found by an independent board not to be needing any requirement for further action. It should be left at that. Why on earth should police officers suffer in a way that anybody working for anything else wouldn't? I think it's wrong. I'll move on to the next questions because we're clearly never going to agree on this. Could I come in, please? Assembly Member Russell.
Thank you. Just briefly, I do think that Londoners are really disgusted and utterly shocked to the core by what came out in that IOPC report. The descriptions of the WhatsApp messages cannot even be read out. There had to be a warning on the front of the report that said that that there was very disturbing content in it. I think Londoners will be asking the same questions as the Deputy Mayor has just been asking about why those officers are still in post. And I just wanted to get that on the record because I have a different opinion to our Chair. Thank you.
I'm going to move on because I think this is. I think we disagree on this. I think if people have been cleared, then that should stand.
Chair,
right.
Sorry, I'm going to come in. I just want to say I don't
can you be quick and we'll go on.
I don't want to repeat what Assembly Member Russell has said, but I just share her observations. We need to get to the bottom of this.
Well, I think I did say that, but equally, I think we ought to be mindful of people's rights in this, and we must not think that police officers don't have any rights in this either. And I'm quite disgusted by it all, and I think that the committee will need to come back to this, because justice has to be done for police officers as well as everybody else. Right, okay, the next question, if I can ask the Deputy Commissioner, what progress has been made on the root and branch review of the Parliamentary and Diplomatic Protection Command, and what are the emerging themes?
Thank you, Chair. So, yeah, members of this group will remember that Commissioner initiated a root and branch review of Parliamentary and Diplomatic Protection Group, and if I fall into acronym PADP, forgive me, but that's what we're talking about, Parliamentary and Diplomatic Protection Officers. This is a review that's being led internally, but with a very strong external guidance and viewpoint. It's working very sensitively alongside the Baroness Casey review, who the Commissioner has asked to come in, and also alongside the Dame Ailish Angelini review, which was initiated by the Home Secretary. So it's looking at aspects of the command structure within the unit, with the supervision levels, to see if they are sufficient. It's looking at the shift patterns. It's looking at all ways of working within the unit to make sure that we can be as confident as possible that officers who are charged with often being armed and protecting important people and parts of the apparatus of government are as trusted as they can be. So it's looking at aspects of vetting as well, but so are those other investigations, inquiries. So it's working sort of hand in glove with those. We haven't had full recommendations back from the review into Parliamentary and Diplomatic Protection yet, but we are expecting them in the next month or so that we can quickly move to improve the situation within that unit. It's difficult to explain in a short period of time just how unique the unit is and the work that they carry out is. So with most police officers working on a police station, on a territorial unit, they will parade together, they will be addressed on the parade by a sergeant or their inspector, they will work together, they will see each other during the day several times. The sergeant and the supervisors can quickly get to know the officers, get a feel for is there anything wrong with the officer's attitude, with their home lives, is he or she under excessive stress for some reason. That's much more challenging within the Parliamentary and Diplomatic Protection Command, simply because these are officers effectively who will work on posts, sort of dedicated geographic posts guarding Parliament and other key buildings, and are therefore often, sometimes on their own, sometimes in pairs, but are not directly supervised and are not engaging very regularly with members of the public either. They are simply acting in an armed capacity to guard people and places. And that is a particular challenge around supervision. And that's what we're looking at in terms of the supervision, the shift systems, how they come together, how well people know the officers. My personal view is the supervision levels within Parliamentary and Diplomatic Protection Unit are too broad, too wide. Sergeants and inspectors are in charge and responsible for too many people, and we will need to put more supervision into those units to assist everybody in the unit to make sure the standards that we expect are held up.
Okay, thank you. I think that's something that we might bring back to this committee. They're certainly in a different situation. I've been out with them when they were in their final tests, having to decide to do different things, and they have to change where they're going. They have to watch all around you the whole time to make sure you're not in danger. It's quite a different sort of policing. I'm sure the committee would be interested in that. Deputy Mayor, following the Commissioner's announcement that she'll be stepping aside, what must the Met do to assure you and the Mayor that it is doing all it can to urgently rebuild the trust and the confidence of Londoners and to root out racism, sexism, homophobia, bullying, discrimination and misogyny from the force?
Thank you. It's interesting to hear what the Deputy Commissioner says around the lessons from PAD-P that are emerging. These are lessons that have emerged from other, well, one of the lessons that have emerged from the Operation Hotton report, in fact, around supervision and supervision ratios and different nature of shift patterns. So it's interesting that there are common themes that come out with different dips into different units within the Metropolitan Police, and I think it is something that you should be interested in as a committee as to what those themes are from all the different investigations and reviews that have taken place, and it's certainly something that myself and MOPAC have been looking at within the Met in terms of holding the Metropolitan Police to account. In terms of the what needs to happen going forward to restore trust and confidence, it's clear, and it's always been clear, and it's one of the great traditions of our police force, not just in London but across the country, that we police by consent. And the shattering of trust and confidence that has taken place over the last few years, but in particular in recent events, means that we really have got to a point where that has been shattered, and we need a step change in the ability of the Metropolitan Police to reach out to communities and to ensure that they restore trust and confidence. To do that, they need to be able to really show that they understand and accept the level and the links between the values, standards and ethics within the Metropolitan Police Service and the service that their officers provide to Londoners. That is what the Mayor wanted to see from the Commissioner and wasn't satisfied that that was forthcoming. So what we will do in working in the weeks and months ahead is to ensure that there is that plan in place, not just to change the internal culture of the Metropolitan Police, but also to ensure that that is externally facing and that communities can have trust and confidence in those officers that are out there day in, day out, providing that vital service to Londoners.
So, I believe the Commissioner actually put proposals to the Mayor of how she was going to bring about these changes. That's correct, isn't it?
The Commissioner did come back after a robust conversation with the Mayor and myself in Union Street, did come back to the Mayor, having been asked for a plan to put in, for an urgent plan to show how she was going to restore trust and confidence in the Metropolitan Police. That plan had a number of things within it around the internal organisation of the Metropolitan Police that she was going to put in place. But what it didn't have was, as I've said before, was a sufficient acceptance of the nature and the severity of the problem, and also as a robust plan of externally engaging with Londoners to improve the trust and confidence in Londoners. And it was at that point that the Mayor made it clear that he wasn't satisfied with the plan, and the Commissioner resigned. So it is, and I would like to put on record, and it was remiss of me not to do it at the beginning, put on record our thanks for the years of public service of the Commissioner, of nearly 40 years of dedicated public service to Londoners, but unfortunately it got to the point where the Mayor was clear that there needed to be a change at the most senior leadership of the Metropolitan Police in order to be able to make the progress that was needed.
So will we get a sight of this plan? Because I wouldn't like another Commissioner to come in to produce exactly the same plan and for it to suddenly be okay. So do we get a view of that plan?
The letter that the Commissioner wrote to the Mayor has already been published on the website of the Metropolitan Police.
Okay, so you're expecting another Commissioner to come up with a different set of ideas?
I'd expect an incoming Commissioner to work with the Mayor and MOPAC, as well as the Metropolitan Police, to put in place a robust plan to improve the trust and confidence in police. It will be for them to look at whether those points that were within the plan need to be continued, enhanced, increased or deepened, and also it will be for them to look, working with us, to ensure that there is a sufficient plan to engage with Londoners to improve the trust and confidence in Londoners, which we have seen shattered over the last few years. We've got to the point, and as I said, we have a proud tradition of policing by consent. Public trust and confidence has been shattered.
Isn't there a risk to this work progressing at pace now that the Commissioner announced she's going? Because we're going to be having to spend a lot of time trying to get another Commissioner in. Isn't there a danger that this work will be put back a while?
The Commissioner we're in an interim period where the Commissioner will stay will stay for a while to ensure that there is some solidity and solidity within the Metropolitan Police. The work will continue. Our work as the Mayor and the Deputy Mayor, my work will continue in holding the Metropolitan Police to account and ensuring that it will continue.
Okay, in your opinion then, what does the Met need to do immediately to start restoring public confidence and trust?
As I have said, I think the Metropolitan Police need to make it much clearer to Londoners that they accept the severity and the depth of the problem within the Metropolitan Police and put in place a robust plan to engage with Londoners to show them how they accept and understand the views and the sensitivities and the feelings of Londoners, and then how they can engage and ensure that they can restore the trust and confidence of Londoners.
Okay, the Commissioner's not here, but I feel sure she would have said that she did understand the issues and she was working on it. Do you want to comment on that, Deputy Commissioner?
There's a number of things I would say, and I won't extend the meeting by speaking too much, but it would be good if the incoming Commissioner gets some feedback from the Mayor or the Deputy Mayor on the plan that was put in, because the existing Commissioner got none despite asking. Submitted the plan, asked how was it being received, what was going on, and was given a stonewall of silence in terms of anything that she could do to improve the plan. So difficult to improve it if you don't know what the critics think needs improving. And this is the first time I've heard any of that from anyone in the Mayor's office, and it's the same is true for the Commissioner. You keep using the word shattered. I understand that. I'm not sitting here being complacent. I'm not saying that everything is fine. It is clearly not. We have major problems within the organisation to deal with the culture. I have never said it's a few bad apples. It clearly is not, but I still believe the vast majority of people inside the organisation are right-thinking, decent people. But I do have to go back to this survey. You know, there's no point in doing a survey if you don't listen to what the figures say. Otherwise, you're just wasting public money. And the figures say, when asked, 75% of the people that you survey trust the Metropolitan Police Service. 14% aren't sure whether they trust or not, but they don't have an opinion either way. And 10% say they don't trust the Metropolitan Police Service. So 1 in 10 say they don't trust. 75% say they do trust. If you don't use those figures, then stop doing the survey. The 50% that you quote, you didn't use the full definition of the question, which is, have you confidence in the Metropolitan Police doing a good job locally? And we fully acknowledge we need to do more about local policing in this city. And with the resources provided, partly by the Mayor, partly by the Home Office, we are doing more to do that. We've put in town centre units. In terms of confidence, you also mentioned this confidence gap, which is quite correct. There is no doubt that black and other ethnic minorities have less trust in the Metropolitan Police Service than white populations. Although, interestingly, a generalisation of the Asian community tends to trust the Metropolitan Police Service more than the white population does. We are seeing more black and Asian officers joining the Metropolitan Police Service than ever. We are seeing the confidence gap reduce. Not as much as we want. We don't want a gap at all, but it is still reducing. And those, again, come from your figures, not ours. And we are seeing more women join the Metropolitan Police Service than at any time in its history. So every time I hear people say, because of the horrific circumstances of the murder of Sarah Everard by one of my colleagues, that has destroyed the confidence of women in the Metropolitan Police Service, of course it gives huge concern. As a father of 2 daughters, it gave me huge concern. But we have more women joining this organisation than ever before. And sadly, we have the first woman commissioner leaving early.
Thank you. No, I've got a list of people that want to come in.
Chair, can I just come back on these figures that Steve,
hang
Deputy
on,
Commissioner...
I've got other people indicating. Just a minute.
Could I just come back on
brief.
I'll try to be brief. I just wanted to come back on the public attitude survey, and there's clearly, there's different figures within the public attitude survey. The figures I am quoting are the figures that make up confidence, and we were very clear in actually at the outset of the job that I am doing. We have broken that down so you can very clearly see where the confidence is coming from. And yes, good job local, 51%. But if you look at fair treatment in the last public attitude survey, fair treatment, if you ask Londoners, do you think the Metropolitan Police will treat you fairly? The largest gaps are for black Londoners, which is a gap of 29% from white Londoners. 50% of black Londoners do not believe they'll be treated fairly. And if you ask mixed ethnicity Londoners, 47% of Londoners do not believe they'll be treated fairly by the Metropolitan Police. So we can, overall, these figures are the figures that make up confidence. There is no doubt about the facts, about the public attitude survey being a very robust survey, and we do take it very, very seriously.
Equally, problems with crime within the black community is something that I have brought up constantly, because we need to assist those communities. And the problem is, the minute we do, we're accused of being racist, or as near as damn being racist. And this is where half the problem is. We need to be speaking out where there are issues, and it's because of this, it's because we are frightened, especially as politicians, especially as white politicians, we are frightened of even saying that. There is an issue with crime in the black community in London. We need to help those communities, but God forbid somebody like me should be saying that. To be fair, our Deputy Commissioner has said it as well as the Commissioner. Now, we're running very late. I've got a list of people that want to speak after my questions. I'll start off with Assembly Member Ahmed.
Thank you very much, Chair. Good morning, panel. Deputy Commissioner, as we know, Wayne Couzens was sadly also a serving officer at this unit at Pad P during the time of Sarah Everard's murder. The review announced into diplomatic protection is said to have been examining vetting as a result of his awful crimes. Was the vetting issue localised and particularly bad within Pad P, or has it been equally bad across the Met as a whole? And if it was just this unit, can you say whether the issue has now been resolved? Bearing in mind that we did, and I personally asked a number of these questions some time ago, I'm hoping that there has been some progress.
Thank you. So firstly, let me say that vetting is an extremely important part of dealing with the problems that we have inside the organisation. The idea that we can either stop people with the wrong attitude or unacceptable views getting in is a great idea if we can do that. Vetting can be strong enough to do that. And it's quite clear, obviously, that Pad P review is looking at that. The Baroness Casey will look at it, but certainly the Ailish Angelini will look specifically at the Wayne Couzens situation. So it would, again, I'm sorry to have to say this, it would be wrong of me to try to preempt what the Ailish Angelini review is going to say and find about vetting. But there are, I don't mean to be confrontational, but there are a number of assumptions in what you say that there was obviously a problem with vetting. At least I think that's what you were suggesting with Wayne Couzens. We are not clear that that is the case. So it is obvious now when you look at his background that there were potential problems. But I would remind people this was a man who'd worked in a previous police force. He'd come to join the Metropolitan Police Service. He came into the organisation through an unarmed command. He came in and worked on Borough for a little while, and then went into an armed command. He did go through vetting. We carried out the vetting, and we believe we carried it out to the appropriate standard. We have raised the standard since, and we are now looking far more at social media usage than we did in the past. But of course, you'll appreciate there's only a certain amount we can do with social media, because WhatsApp, for example, which is the popularly used group, is a closed group. And we cannot access that unless we are doing so under a criminal investigation.
So
we can't do it
if I can stop you just for a moment, Deputy
Sure.
Thank you. But you talked about the fact that he came through from a different service as well. What is, I think people do find really quite shocking is the fact that the issues in that police service hadn't been picked up, and he was able to come to the Met and nothing had happened to stop it. So clearly the process at the time wasn't as robust, but you said that you have upped that and that there are changes, and that's good to hear, and I hope that the review will highlight changes that need to happen as well. Thank you. Moving on, officers from this particular unit are responsible for guarding entry to Downing Street and are also based within number 10 itself, as we found out from a previous incident involving a special advisor being marched off the Downing Street estate. The Telegraph reports that part of the Partygate inquiry shows that officers from the unit who were based at number 10 gave extremely damning statements. Why didn't these officers act to prevent the rule breaking that was happening at the time, and will they be reprimanded for not doing so?
So I confess I'm not an expert in the security arrangements in number 10, and if I was, I wouldn't tell you what they were anyway, because this is being live streamed. So for obvious reasons, I wouldn't do. But yes, parliamentary and diplomatic protection officers are involved in the protection of Downing Street. You will appreciate, and members will know this, as you walk down or drive down Whitehall, you will see the big gates, and you will see 4 or 5 officers standing inside the gates with firearms. Those are parliamentary diplomatic protection officers. They are not there to check people with number 10 passes or parliamentary passes. They don't check contents of what they're carrying. That's not their job. They are there to protect against terrorist attack on number 10 or people going in and out of number 10. So they're not there to check what's in people's bags. And I can't say too much about this because this is a live investigation into events that took place at number 10 and in the Cabinet Office. But I think I can go as far as to say that the vast majority of people who we have sent questionnaires to are people who work in those buildings and are already in the buildings. So I think maybe sometimes people have an idea that there's tipsy revellers walking down Whitehall with Christmas hats on and blowing poppers, etc., carrying, bottles of clanking wine, etc., going in. The point I'm making is that many of the circumstances, and I have to be careful not to go too far here, many of the circumstances that we're investigating were events that took place at the end of the working day or as an adjunct to the working day, with people who were already in the building and had been there since 7, 8 o'clock in the morning. And when you talk about officers stationed inside Downings, armed up, that is not the circumstances. Officers guard the gate, and there's an officer on the door. Armed officers do not routinely, but I'll come back to this, so please let me finish, do not routinely walk through the Cabinet Office or number 10 Downing Street. One officer was involved, and again, I'm hoping I'm not going too far here, one officer was involved in responding with a civilian custodian, not one of our employees, a civilian custodian who works for number 10, with responding to a silent alarm, which we believe had been pressed in error. And that officer has been spoken to, both by the Sue Gray investigation and will be spoken to by ourselves.
But, Deputy Commissioner, are you saying that these serving police officers were therefore not going to stop rule-breaking, clear breaches of the rule at the time?
How did they know they're standing on the gate?
They were listening to the parties in the garden.
Well, who says that?
The information that we have at the moment, and I'm sure that will come out, and the damning statements made by your officers there at the time say that there was an issue. So if we can just move on from that slightly, would those officers have made the decision at the time to intervene, or would it have been a senior, would they have had to have referred it to a more senior officer? And if that's the case, is that where the decision would have been made not to intervene?
We will. You have my assurance that if we find officers knew what was going on and should have intervened, then we will follow up on that. But I'm not going to operate on the back of what the Daily Telegraph says. OK,
thank you very much. Now that you've received questionnaires back from those who were suspected of attending the parties, can you give an update of when you expect the investigation to conclude?
The Commissioner did say when she spoke at the last one of these, we won't give a running commentary. However, in terms of being held accountable by this group, we are operating at pace. We have sent out questionnaires to more than 50 people. That does not mean that we won't send out more questionnaires. It may be that when we get the first tranche back and we start looking at them, we see more people that we need to send questionnaires to. We are starting to receive questionnaires back. and they are now being reviewed as to whether or not there is a reasonable excuse within that response that means that the person did not breach COVID regulations. If there is not what we believe to be a reasonable excuse in there, then we will go ahead to move towards issuing of fixed penalty notices.
We were told that this investigation would not take months, it would take weeks. Do you still stand by that?
Yes, I believe it will do.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Assembly Member Devenish.
Thank you. Going back to the trust and confidence points, London is facing actually a very good thing at the moment. It's a jobs boom. But in terms of the trust and confidence of the Met, and almost an argument between very senior people on this panel this morning, I'm hearing from frontline police officers that they're looking for other jobs. Are you, Deputy Commissioner, worried? And if we don't rebuild trust and confidence and morale in the Met, you're going to lose a heck of a lot of officers very quickly?
I completely acknowledge that the sort of events that we've seen, and also the much wider issue around the things that have knocked public confidence in the Met and in policing, may give people pause in terms of will they join. But we are seeing, as I say, record numbers of women joining the organisation, and we are still in the middle of one of the biggest recruitment uplifts that we've ever seen. In fact, probably the biggest we've ever seen in the Metropolitan Police Service. So it's again, with support from the Mayor and from the Home Office, the organisation is, I think, now officially bigger than it's ever been in terms of officer numbers. There is no doubt, however, that what you talked about first off, Assembly Member, the vibrant jobs market and the salaries that are being offered in London will be an attraction to police officers. I mean, I'm seeing figures quoted of, you know, if you train to be a lorry driver, an HGV driver, you're going to get on £50,000 straight away. Well, the starting salary of a police officer in the Metropolitan Police Service, with all the allowances involved, is around about £29,000 a year. We are in the middle of recommending to the pay review body what the pay rise should be for police officers, but we're looking probably at inflation of 5%. And I doubt that a pay award will be at 5%, which means officers will fall back again. And I have regular correspondence from my officers telling me that they're worse off now than they were 6 and 12 years ago in terms of take-home money because of the cost of living. So I think there is a huge issue there around the remuneration package for police officers, which I think, in all candour, is more important in a driver for recruiting and for retaining officers than the confidence issue. Of course, morale has been knocked. Morale has been knocked by for a number of reasons. We don't like the fact that one of our members is a murderer. We don't like the fact that we have a number of people facing rape allegations. It's horrific for us. Most people join to stop that, not to be part of an organisation where people are doing it. It's absolutely gut-wrenching for us. But nonetheless, most officers in this organisation are right-minded, right-thinking people who want to do the right thing. Of course, their morale has been knocked, but they're still out there doing the job. Violent crime is still coming down. They're still dealing with terrorism on a regular basis. They're confronting armed criminals. I'd love you to have a look at the number of officers that we have injured. We had one officer injured over the weekend who suffered a bite to his scalp. He was in I think it was a domestic situation, and he was attacked by somebody, and he was bitten on the head to the extent that grievous bodily harm has been charged against the individual who did it. They're still coming to work.
Thank you very much. And to the Deputy Mayor, while I agree with much of what you said in terms of language and culture in the Met needs to change, do you think the way your language and culture with the Mayor and the way you're interfacing with the Met is wholly proper at all times?
I think your fundamental question about recruitment into the Metropolitan Police, it is challenging at the moment, coming out of COVID with a very buoyant jobs market. It is very, very challenging. What is also very challenging, and you are right to raise it, is the issue of making sure that we recruit the most diverse, we get diversity into the Metropolitan Police. And there has been improvements, and that absolutely, the Deputy Commissioner is right to point out that we've got real improvements in the number of women joining the Metropolitan Police. And we have also had improvements in the number of black and minority ethnic people joining the Metropolitan Police. However, we've got a long, long way to go. And morale in the Metropolitan Police is one of the things that's concerned me for a long time, not just in recent weeks and in the recent weeks with what has happened with the Commissioner. And the morale has been a problem for a number of reasons. pay being, I think, a significant issue around that not just the Metropolitan Police, but nationally, police officers have not been paid, have not had the increases, and they've had the frozen pay. That really does affect morale. But I would also say, and I don't mean this in a combative way at all, we must also think about the morale of those officers who do witness the bullying and harassment that we have seen within Charing Cross Police Station, and the morale of police officers who don't feel able to come forward to whistle blow and are not supported in the way that they should be. Many do, and we must, we have seen an increase in officers coming forward, but we need to make it much easier and support those officers that are wanting to do the right thing, and to make sure that those officers within the Metropolitan Police that aren't doing the right thing are dealt with robustly. So, yes, it is a challenge, recruitment into the Metropolitan Police at the moment. It's a challenge nationally for the whole of policing to ensure that they can get the officers in with the uplift that we are at the moment undertaking.
Answer my second question, Deputy Mayor.
Okay. Your second question about in terms of my stance towards the Metropolitan Police and the Mayor's stance towards the Metropolitan Police, there are 1,300 additional officers in the Metropolitan Police because of the commitment and the support that the Mayor has undertaken since day one in office. He has invested over £1 billion into the Metropolitan Police, and as I said, there are 1,300 additional officers in the Metropolitan Police serving Londoners because of the support that the Mayor has put in. And it's not just in terms of additional officers, support with body-worn video, rolling out of protective measures, improving the police stations and the buildings that they're working in, improving the IT that they're working with. If you want to talk about morale, when you go out with frontline officers, they're trying to use their technology that doesn't work, or having to interrogate 7, 8 different databases in order to be able to understand where
Deputy
they
Mayor,
are
I'll leave it there,
arriving at in terms of response.
I know we're short at time. All I'd say is I think language both ways. We've got to improve the relationship between you, the Mayor, and senior officers, but I'll leave it there.
Thank you. Assemblymember Russell.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I just want to pick up a bit more on the trust and confidence issue. We've seen, for years, black communities have been complaining about disproportionality in policing, and that has been a kind of a regular drumbeat of criticism. But I think what has happened over this last sort of few years, we've had the murders of Gabrielle Cavari, Anthony Walgate, Daniel Whitworth, and Jack Taylor. We've had the way that appeared to, that institutional homophobia may have been an issue there. We've had the shocking treatment of Bieber Henry and Nicole Smallman after their deaths with the shared WhatsApp photographs. And we've had the murder of Sarah Everard, and apart from the fundamental shock of a serving police officer having deceived, kidnapped, raped and murdered a Londoner on her way home, we then had the shocking way that the visual was policed, and the lack of understanding about what Londoners were coming out to express when they went to attend that vigil. And we then, with the IOPC report, we hear that that they were grateful to the officers who were brave enough to speak to us about their experiences, realising that in doing so they risked further bullying. There is a culture that seems to be very deep-rooted, and I absolutely understand the Commissioner's support for officers. I understand the Deputy Commissioner's support for officers today, and I cannot imagine what it is like to be a serving police officer with all of this going on, particularly if you are there for the good reasons of policing London by consent. But my question for the Assistant Commissioner is, do you think that the Met's response has been too defensive with all of this? And I absolutely understand why you want to stand up for the good officers, but the IOPC report that into what was going on at Charing Cross, it makes it clear that it's not just a few people who are doing bad things. It is an institutional issue. And do you think you need to be less defensive in order to help Londoners to really believe that you understand the shock that people feel at what has been revealed recently?
Well, it's a very wide-ranging question, and frankly, I was with you up until you started talking about the vigil for Sarah Everard. Nobody in this room can be more shocked than I was in relation to, or more upset than I was about the actions of Wayne Couzens. And that's true across the Metropolitan Police Service as a whole. I have to remind people, when it comes to the vigil, that was investigated by the HMI, and they came out with a report which basically said, if I may say so, that the Metropolitan Police Service handled a very difficult situation in the way that they had to handle it because of the COVID regulations at that time. And we saw it as a report which gave us some learning lessons, certainly, but did not criticise us in terms of our approach to that vigil and the way it was policed. And I would again draw a distinction between what happened at that vigil before 6 o'clock at night and what happened afterwards, when it turned from a vigil into a political rally, and a very violent and aggressive one too. I pick up your point about the quote from the IOPC and their reflection of the bravery of officers who spoke. I think, and I'm being candid here, of course there is a police culture, and of course it is based on teamwork and sticking together and helping each other, because it is a team job, and sometimes it's a dangerous job and a physical job, and people get hurt, as I expressed a few moments ago. But I too would pay tribute to officers who come forward. We are rooting out more and more people who do wrong in the Metropolitan Police Service, and the unfortunate downside of that is there will be more publicity about people being exited from the organisation, which will make it sound as though it's getting worse, when in fact we would earnestly hope and do all we can to make sure it's actually getting better by exiting these people from the organisation. So we have a number of ways in which members of the organisation can talk to us and tell us about wrongdoing, and the numbers are increasing. In fact, I think over the last 5 years, numbers have doubled. We need to see them increase even more. Let me tell you about one initiative that has been launched recently called Cigna. Now, Cigna is an initiative which came from the network of women, which is, as it sounds, within the organisation, led by one of our detective chief superintendents. She has helped design this system, which is in effect an anonymous way for people, men and women, but it is mainly used by women, to tell the organisation about things that are happening to them that they are uncomfortable with. It does not name people, but it identifies locations and tells us where there are hotspots that we need to deal with. And so far it's proving to be extremely successful and popular. We are seeing more people coming forward to use the right line, which is the way of reporting it, and more people coming forward to supervisors to call out problems. Let me just quote something to you. This is a personal message sent by the Commissioner to every member of the organisation on the 4th of February, so not that long ago. For only the third time since I became Commissioner in 2017, I'm writing to every member of the Met because I feel so angry that public confidence is being damaged by too many unacceptable instances of poor conduct, nasty and inappropriate behaviour and lack of respect. Put simply, there is no room in the Met for discrimination or prejudice, racism, homophobia or sexism, or any type of hate or disrespect will not be tolerated. If this is you, I have a message for you. The Met does not want you. Leave now. It finishes by saying, enough is enough. Now, this has gone out to every member of the organisation. Every member of Management Board has been speaking since that date to as many officers as we can get together to read this to them and then to have a discussion with them about what's been happening. And the vast response is, we're angry as well. We don't want these people inside the organisation. The Commissioner has led this effort personally and is actually still doing it. She's still going out and talking to officers about this now, to say, look, we don't want you in the Met. If you're like this, if you think like this, if you behave like this, get out. If you know somebody who does think like this or behave like this, tell us who they are and we will get them out. We are serious about this. Maybe we haven't publicised. We're not perfect. I'm not perfect. Cress is not perfect. Maybe we haven't publicised enough what we're doing. Maybe the passion doesn't come across enough for this. But it exists. It is real inside the organisation. And it will work.
Can I just briefly come back? I think you're absolutely right about that communication piece, because I think that what has been, what perhaps Londoners have heard is a defensiveness and that passion for rooting out that completely disgusting and awful behaviour that has been shown by some officers. And I really do realise it's not every Metropolitan Police officer, but it is. I do think people need to hear that communication piece to avoid the Metropolitan Police appearing to Londoners to be defensive.
But I fully accept that. I may say, Chair, you know, the Commissioner goes on Eddie Nesta on a regular basis. She goes on Ferrari on a regular basis. And this is the language she uses. She does speak about her disgust, her anger at this. She was on Eddie Nesta only a couple of weeks ago saying exactly that. I heard her say it, and she had a tough time. He asked her some difficult questions, but her response is genuine to these things. But I hear what you're saying.
Thank you, yes, and I've heard her say that, and many of us have. Unfortunately, the media don't pick up on that. They pick up on comments, very often, colleagues, by politicians, and use those against officers. Assembly Member Best.
Thank you, Chair. Just wanted to briefly ask a question of you, Deputy Mayor. Earlier, when you thanked a serving police officer, it was almost like an afterthought. And from many of the police officers that I've spoke to in the last few weeks, that's the feeling that they get from the Mayor and you supporting them as Deputy Mayor. You talked about the trust being shattered, and I think the Deputy Commissioner has been quite open and honest, and especially in that answer just then, and saying himself and Cressida Dick aren't perfect and mistakes have been made. But what comes out of this for me, and the trust and confidence issue, is there seems to be no culpability from either you or the Mayor. So have you made any mistakes in the last few years? Can you admit that perhaps both you and the Mayor have not been perfect?
Just on your question around support for officers, it isn't an afterthought. Since I took this post up and since the Mayor took his post up, we have done nothing but support the Metropolitan Police, support them in every way, from being alongside them on patrol when we can with police officers, listening to them, talking to them, understanding their position, but also, as I've already pointed out to Assembly Member Devonish, the really important issue of investing in the Metropolitan Police. The Mayor has invested record amounts.
It's not a question of investing. You can invest in things and they're not still a good idea.
Beg your pardon?
It's not a question of investing. It's a question of have any mistakes been made. You can invest in something and it can still be a mistake. We're not talking about money. We're talking about have you or the Mayor made any mistakes?
Your question was in two parts. One was about not supporting frontline police officers, and I'm answering that part of the question, and I will come on to the other part. And I strongly refute the fact that you suggest that we have not supported frontline police officers. We have done so, and one very, very concrete way that that can be shown is by the record amounts that the Mayor has invested in the Metropolitan Police, switching business rates for the first time ever into the Met. And that has been it's a matter of public record, the amount, and the fact that there are 1,300 additional officers on the streets of London because of the support that the Mayor has had. Of course, in anybody's job, and having done this job for a number of years, of course there are things that I should have done better. Of course there are lessons that can be learnt, and of course I will always look to see what lessons can be learnt, whether that be lessons about in terms of holding the Met to account, whether that be lessons in the way that we've invested our money. I've always looked back and thought, okay, then what lessons can be learnt? What should we be doing about this, and how should we be doing things differently in the future?
Thank you, Chair. Just briefly, I haven't suggested that you haven't supported. I don't have to. It's the police officers on the ground that have said it. and continue to say it. So it is that relationship that you need to work on, not the one with me, not proving to me with officers. And I do appreciate you saying that you've made mistakes, because it has felt over the last few weeks especially as though from the Mayor and yourself, the Commissioner's now the scapegoat and every fault is being laid at the Met's door. And so I appreciate that you today take some of the burden of those mistakes on your shoulders too.
Thank you. Assembly Member Desai.
Chair, just continuing the theme of trust and confidence in policing. My question is to you, Deputy Commissioner. Were you aware of a speech that Sir Michael Barber made yesterday, as reported in The Guardian? He spoke at a webinar organised by the Centre for Policy Exchange. So I'm not going to put you on the spot. His report is coming out. It's a national report. It's a strategic review of policing in England and Wales with 54 recommendations. It's going to be published in 2 weeks' time. But this is what he had to say in advance. There's a clear crisis of confidence in policing in England and Wales. I'm not going to stats, whether it's 51%, whatever. This is a person who's leading the strategic review of the future of policing in our country. He himself says there's a clear crisis of confidence in policing in England and Wales. This is not just the result of recent high-profile cases, but it's far more fundamental. Huge societal, technological, and environmental changes are happening at warp speed, yet too often policing seems stuck in the past, hardly fit for the present, let alone the future. And this is my question to you. What he says is that, talking about Charing Cross Station, taken together with some deep-rooted issues around professional development, training, leadership, the challenges for police are great and growing. And we hope that our report will mark a fundamental turning point in the modernization for public service that matters deeply to us all. So shouldn't we be looking at this debate in a much wider context, that the police service, not just the Met, needs to come to grips with the fact that it needs to modernize very quickly. He also, just to say as well, and finish, Chair, he said that we got a better max police force unsuccessfully pursuing blockchain-enabled criminals, which I thought might be a bit harsh, but that is what he had to say.
Sorry, I didn't get the last bit. Would you mind?
This is what he just said, that we got a better max police force unsuccessfully pursuing blockchain-enabled criminals.
Yeah, it's a lovely soundbite. I don't agree with it. And unfortunately, I have factual reasons not to, which I can't tell you about, which are ongoing investigations at the Metropolitan Police Service leading that are cutting-edge, global leading investigations into issues that I'm already saying too much about. So I don't agree with his analysis. What I would do, and it's a very interesting and valuable question. You know, where is policing in general? We're responding to constant and growing public expectations that ethically hugely difficult decisions will be explained and justified all the time. Tell us why you're doing this. Why are you not doing this? Why are you doing this? While we are carrying out an investigation and we cannot comment. Everything's a priority. Resources are finite. I fully agree with the Deputy Mayor. The Mayor has given us extra money and funding has been good in the last few years. But we are moving into a technological age that we have never been in before. We're going through 2 technological introductions of a new command and control system. Our current command and control system is something like 35 years old. I don't think anyone in this room's got technology in their house that will be 35 years old.
According to Sir Michael Barber, is actually 50 years old.
Yeah, well, there you go.
And he does actually argue the case for you to be good, much more support in terms of technology and so on.
Yeah, we're still rebuilding a police service that's emerging from a decade of austerity. And one of the sides of that is, yes, we are bringing in record numbers of officers, but these are inexperienced officers who need extra supervision, not less supervision. So that's a problem for us.
He also talks of the impact of cuts to the police service and the need for more support from the government.
But I think maybe I'm making an assumption here, but I see societies becoming a less deferential society towards authority on a daily basis. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing, particularly. Unstinting deference to authority is not a good path to be on. We are being required to be accountable more and more. Cress will regularly have said in this, not this building, but this forum, she will regularly have said the Metropolitan Police Service and policing in the UK is held to account more than any other public body, and I firmly believe that to be the case. So I'm sure if I read his report, and I'm afraid I haven't yet, I may agree with much of it. Society is going through changes. Police service is having to go through those changes as well. We cannot do so at the same pace as the private sector because we don't have the money they have. And we therefore have to rush to keep up. In terms of the leadership, etc., I'm happy to go on record that I think a previous government's decision to close the Police Leadership Academy at Bramshill was a disastrous mistake to make and has damaged police leadership across the UK. But that ship has sailed, I'm afraid.
Thank you. Right, we are running very, very late, so if I can ask guests to also keep their questions as short as possible. We're going on now to Assembly Member Pigeon.
Thank you very much. I just want to say, as I move into my questions, that it's been painted this morning very black and white, that one side must be right or the other, and actually it's somewhere in between. And I think Londoners have felt, as a colleague has said, really concerned about what's come out. And you may well internally have been very concerned as a Metropolitan Police. That hasn't always come across. And I think that is a real challenge. And also, the Mayor and co may not have followed the process, which one would expect in this sort of situation. But clearly, how do we rebuild trust and confidence in the police, in the Metropolitan Police? So, first of all, to the Deputy Commissioner, what are you doing as a Met to proactively engage with different communities in London? We've talked a bit about, for example, the black community this morning, but also the LGBTQ+ community. Really, it feels damaged, that relationship, given the Port inquest. What are you doing, and what more are you going to be doing to rebuild trust?
So let me deal first. I mean, it's slightly invidious, and I know you don't mean this to divide people up into sort of communities and badges like that. But to go with it, in terms of our desire and urgent need to recruit more black candidates into the organisation, we have done a huge number of things. Let me just pick a couple. So we knew very early that through our analysis that when black candidates came forward to join the Metropolitan Police Service, they were being disadvantaged. There was something in the system that was making them not succeed at the rate that they should have done, given their academic qualifications, their life experience. So we went through a review with the Home Office and the College of Policing to fix the system. That has resulted in changes to the national recruiting process. Now, we had to do that twice. The first time it helped a bit, but it didn't solve the problem. But we're now in a situation where black candidates coming forward to join the Metropolitan Police Service are equally as likely to get in as white candidates are. And that was at our insistence that we have that review. We worked with the Home Office and the College of Policing to do that. So we think we have sorted some areas out there. Continuing the idea of recruiting, all black candidates who join the Metropolitan Police Service are given a buddy for their first couple of years in the organisation, because we need to do something about our retention rates, because we lose more black officers in the first couple of years than we should do. And we know that, and we know that's a warning signal we have to chase down. So we have appointed a chief inspector on each of our 12 BCUs with a specific role to look at retention levels for black officers and women officers in the organisation, so that we don't lose people that we are fighting to bring into the organisation. We have an outreach team of over 50 officers. They are very diverse ethnically, a lot of black officers, a lot of Asian officers, who are working all the time in the community to try to encourage more black and Asian candidates to join the organisation. We work very closely with the Metropolitan Police Black Association, Black Officers Association, and with the Muslim Association as well. I meet with them both very, very regularly to talk about what more we can do. I've led the Deputy Commissioner's delivery group, which has responded to the Mayor's action plan around diversity issues following Black Lives Matter and other events. And I think that work has gone in general well. There's still more to do, but we've moved things along very well, I believe. In terms of LGBTQ+, I hope you know this, we have a very long-standing and very active IAG with that community, who have been, quite rightly, very challenging towards us in and around the horribly disappointing results coming from the Colin Port inquest. They have been challenging, but they have not severed their links with us. They have continued to work with us and are still working with us to try to improve our officers' understanding. We're bringing in a whole raft of new training for officers, all the way from new recruits, all the way through to detectives in terms of effectively spotting issues that should, the natural curiosity and nosiness that we expect, frankly, from police officers to go, oh, well, that's a bit strange, isn't it? Which seems to have been lost, possibly through overwork, possibly through lack of supervision or too wide a supervision. But we're working with the communities to try to learn from them and also let them see what we're doing to give them extra confidence. And a whole, I mean, this is not me being defensive, and I'm not trying to grasp at straws here, but certainly the senior officer Stuart Cundy, who gave evidence at the inquest, was highly praised at the inquest for the depth of the work that was being done, the work that he was leading, following a review of what went wrong and how to fix it. So I can assure, and we can probably, I haven't got the detail here. We can certainly bring forward detail, if you want to see it, of what has been done and what is being done to make sure that these sort of things, the possibility of them happening again, are absolutely minimised.
That's reassuring in terms of making sure the force looks like London and those sorts of processes. Yeah. You've mentioned the IAG, but what about other community groups? What about other LGBTQ plus fora that exist in London? What about other sort of community groups? What are you doing to reach out to them, to work with them, to try to boost the confidence in the Metropolitan Police?
Again, I'll go to a systematic answer, but there's much more behind it, which is every BCU has a performance target that they will engage with at least 12 meaningful initiatives with community groups per year. And that's in our performance framework, and that is being measured on a weekly basis by myself at the performance group on a quarterly basis or 6 weekly basis. So we're putting it into the performance framework that they're expected to do that. But we also have a significant presence, as you will know, on each BCU of community officers who will reach out into the communities, not just the local officers on the local units, but also specialists who work within community support units on the BCUs, whose job it is to make sure that those contacts exist and are improved. And of course, that has taken a knock following Colin Port. We know that. We do understand that, and it is completely understandable that it has, because if you look at what happened, the organisation failed people quite clearly in that situation. And we are working hard to make sure the public understand that we acknowledge that and that we are changing the way we work so that we minimise the chances of it happening again.
Lovely, thank you. I'd be interested to see what the BCUs, the 12 per year, to get a flavour of that, please, if that's possible. I'm sure other members would be interested in that as well. I'd like to move on to the Baroness Casey's independent review. We were told that work was due to start in January 2022, reviewing the Met's culture and standards. Has that actually started?
Yes, it has. I can't give you the exact date in January, but yes, it did start. She and her colleague, or one of her colleagues, met with management board in January, and work has started. She's in and around Scotland Yard on a regular basis now. I've seen her. I know she's met the deputy mayor. She certainly met the mayor. I think last week. And yes, she's up and running.
Good. Lovely. And it's still expected to take 9 to 12 months? It
is, but the Commissioner's been very clear, and Baroness Casey's been equally clear back, that we won't wait until that time to get recommended. It will be a rolling programme.
Good. How are both the Baroness Casey review and then the Met's Rebuilding Trust Action Plan being linked to make sure that there's no sort of duplication?
That's a really good question. There's a lot of moving parts here. As I said in response to an earlier question, you've got the PAD-P review, you've got the Angelini review, you've got Baroness Casey review, and you've got our own Rebuilding Trust work, which is, has got its programme of 20 deliverables that we're working on in the short, medium and long term. So there's a lot going on. but we do have a small team of people whose job it is to coordinate. So we have people working alongside, not embedded with, but working alongside the Casey review and the Angelini review as well, to make sure that they're getting access where they want it and to deconflict where that is necessary. It's a small team. It's a very specialist but high-powered team that are doing that work. The Commissioner chairs our Rebuilding Trust board every 2 weeks, and part of that is to make sure that everything is working in parallel and is not getting in each other's way, not duplicating unless the two of them, because obviously, you know, Angelini has complete independence. Baroness Casey wouldn't, knowing her as an individual, wouldn't have taken the job on if she didn't have independence to do it. So if they want to duplicate, I guess they will, but, you know, to try and make sure that it's all coordinated.
And will Baroness Casey's review be looking at the growing evidence of cultural issues, including Operation Hotton?
Absolutely. She's been given, Cress and her met recently, and the agreement was they will focus in on that as one of the first issues that they will look at, with no stone unturned. And I met actually yesterday with one of our officers who is doing this coordination, and with the Secretary and the Chair of the Federation for the Met, to talk to them about how they would talk to their members about full cooperation with both of the inquiries. And they're very, very keen to do that.
Good, thank you. Deputy Mayor, given the volume of issues and increasing breadth of concerns, can you assure me that the Baroness Casey will have the resources needed to be able to carry out this robust and detailed review?
Baroness Casey's review is a review that was commissioned by the Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police. But if there is any issue around resources, that's not. I mean, that should never be a barrier, because this is such an important review for the Metropolitan Police. I think it is really, it's a moment in time, an incredibly important historic review that's going to be undertaken. I have met with her twice recently, and I think one of my concerns about the review is the breadth of the review and the ability to do that as quickly as possible, given the position we are in, and those interim findings and learning as she goes along is going to be incredibly important. Because, you know, the complexity and size of the Met mean that she's got a real challenge on her hands. However, I would say that I have complete confidence to the Metropolitan Police. You know, the Commissioner and the Deputy Commissioner have been very clear that she can go where she wants to go. She can ask for what she wants to, and the data, and whoever she wants to speak to. And I have confidence that that will happen.
Her terms of reference don't specify reference to homophobia, racism and sexism. Given the Mayor's recent comments, is that something that you would support being included in those terms of reference? So it's very clear that all these areas will be looked at.
I don't think we need to reopen the terms of reference. I think the terms of reference are wide enough to look at the culture of the Metropolitan Police. So it's very, and I have spoken to her about this, it's very clear that where she needs to go, she will go. So yes, of course, she will look at all those areas and those aspects of culture, but because the terms of reference are wide enough to do that, and you don't need a list within that to enable her to do that.
Okay, and finally from me, I read in the press that the HMI they carried out a review the Home Secretary had asked for into anti-corruption procedures following the Morgan report. It states that this was handed in and you were briefed on it the week that the Commissioner then resigned, and it's extremely damning. Are you able to comment on that, and are you able to advise us when that report will be published?
I'm not able to comment on that because I was given a confidential briefing on that. The report is now with the Metropolitan Police for factual accuracy, and we'll have to wait for it to be published in its final form.
Are you able to advise?
So it was, the Deputy Mayor is correct, it was with the Metropolitan Police for factual accuracy. We'd done that. The deadline was Monday, I think, at 11 o'clock, and it has gone back to the HMI for them to consider our comments and then to produce the final report, which I believe will be towards the end of March.
Thank you very much.
Assembly Member Ahmed, did you still want to come in?
Yes, Chair, if I may. This is a question for you both. The terms of reference for the government's own inquiry into the specific failings associated with Sarah Everard's murder, which will cover vetting and the missing of red flags, which we have covered, were released this month, and the report is due to be published later this year. The government has said that the inquiry has been established on a non-statutory footing, but if necessary, the Home Secretary may agree to convert it into a statutory inquiry. following advice from the Chair. Do you feel that this should have been a statutory inquiry from the start, as many charities and legal groups have called for, or are there benefits to bringing it in on a non-statutory footing? Deputy Mayor, if you'd like to start.
I understand the reasons why people want it to be a public inquiry. I absolutely understand that, because there's powers that come with that and the ability to call witnesses and everything like that. However, I also understand why it's been set up as a non-statutory inquiry, and actually it links back to the questions around the speed in which Baroness Casey is going to do her review, and I think and I hope that the fact that it's not a statutory inquiry means that that inquiry will proceed much more quickly than it would have done if it was a public inquiry. If it doesn't, I think it should be, it should be reviewed as to whether it should move to a public inquiry. But at the moment, I think we should allow Baroness Angelini to do her job, to get going as quickly as possible, as she is doing, and to make sure that it is as fast as possible. I think a public inquiry often gets mired and takes years and years to come to a conclusion.
Thank you. Deputy Commissioner, did you have anything to add?
I tend to agree. I'm quite sure Dame Eilish Angelini is capable of deciding that she wants it to become a public inquiry, and she won't be backwards in saying so if she thinks that's the right way to go. I do think there are advantages in the way it's been done at the moment. If it needs to convert, then we'll be supportive of that.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Assembly Member Duval, I'm sorry, one of your questions has already been answered.
Yeah,
thank you.
Chair, in fact, on Operation Sigma, we might want some written commentary back with some further evidence about how you think it's proceeding and the success. But my question relates to the urgent review that you've commissioned into current investigations into allegations of sexual misconduct and domestic violence against officers and staff within the MPS. In addition to the dip sampling from the last 10 years, what are the findings, and when will the Insight report, Capture, Identify, Organisation Learning, be published?
I can't answer you directly, I'm sorry. I haven't seen it yet, and we are waiting for it in terms of what can we learn from it, what did we not get right in the past, was it a resourcing issue, was it a focus issue, were we blind to something? We're very keen to get it. It has not reached my desk yet, nor the Commissioners.
Do you think it's nearing?
It's very close, yeah.
It's very close.
Yeah, it's very close, and I'm sorry, it's probably in here somewhere, but I can't find it right now as to when the date is, but yes, I would say it's a matter of weeks away. Not many.
Yeah, no. Can you write a letter to this committee as and when it's done? So it might well be a forerunner to any other report with some commentary around it.
Absolutely.
In terms of maybe trying to answer that question when it's appropriate. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We'll make a note of that. Thank you. We're now moving on to our second section, which is still Operation Hotton, but the recommendations, and Assembly Member Russell starting that.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so for the Deputy Commissioner, the IOPC recommended that the Met should review and ensure the adequacy of its current training and guidance in the appropriate use of social media. How is the Met progressing this, and how is the impact of that training being measured?
Yeah, I mean, it's a recommendation I would have made as well if I'd been on the IOPC, and it's an easy thing to say. I'm not sure it's as easy to deliver as all that, but I can tell you what we're doing. So I speak to every new recruit now that joins the organisation. I'm just focusing on new recruits for the moment. I speak to every new recruit and for about an hour, which I think is about as much as they can stand, really. Probably 20 minutes of it is based on conversations about social media. I talk to them on day 2, usually, of when they've joined the organisation, so they are literally brand new. And they are often quite shocked by the things I say to them about the social media. So we talk about what transgressions officers have had in relation to using social media and the horrific things that have gone on in social media in terms of images and in terms of language and expressions. And we talk about what's acceptable and what's not acceptable in very clear and stark terms. And I have to say to you, the audience is, I think, quite taken aback at times in terms of what I say to them, such as, you will already be in WhatsApp groups with friends who have not joined the Metropolitan Police Service. They don't have our standards, they don't have our values, and they may well send you things on a WhatsApp group that you're already on that would not meet our standards. You need to think what you're going to do about that. Because if that becomes known to us, we will seize your phone. And whilst we may do nothing to the people outside the organisation, you may well be put in front of the IOPC, you may go in front of a gross misconduct panel, and you may lose your job as a result of this. That's quite a lot to give somebody on their second day in a brand new organisation. But nonetheless, we think it's the only thing that we can do. They then get formal sessions throughout their training in terms of what our values are, the code of ethics, what they should regard as acceptable or unacceptable, what we regard as unacceptable in the organisation, and more advice about their use of social media. They also get it from the Federation, who come to talk to them about these things. They get it from professional standards officers, who also come and talk to them about it. And this happens all very early on in their training, so that they get the message as early as possible. On top of that, several months ago now, I wrote to every officer, and we put it on the internet as well, that we expected more. This was a sort of a precursor to the message I read out from the Commissioner. And one of the three things that we were saying to officers and staff then was use of social media. There's been too many unacceptable examples of use of social media inside the organisation, and people had to start with themselves. Am I blameless in this? And then they had to think, if they were on a group and people in the organisation were posting, they had to tell us about it, because standing by and doing nothing was not acceptable. Deleting is not enough. They had to come and tell a supervisor about it so that we could root this out. That has been repeated by the Commissioner. It's been repeated by every member of Management Board who speaks to officers. We are looking at what we can do with technology, but you will realise there are legal issues here. We cannot intrude in people's private social media without just cause to do so. So the idea that we can dip sample does not currently exist in police regulations, and would be a breach of people's freedoms and privacy, which many members of this group would be unhappy about. There is a question, and I have posed it to Baroness Casey myself. If you join the Metropolitan, or you join any police service in the UK where we police by consent, where we expect our officers to behave to a higher standard than members of the public, then maybe, and we give them powers which they can use, coercive powers they can use on members of the public in the right circumstances, do we need to set higher standards, and does there need to be a different set of legislation for police officers? In other words, they don't have the protection of some of legislation which members of the public have. That is something I hope Baroness Casey will look at and may well make some recommendations upon. If that gives the public and people such as yourselves greater confidence in the values of the organisation, then it may be worth doing. But it would be a reduction in officers' rights of privacy and freedom of speech in some respects. But I do think it's something that needs to be at least considered before it's dismissed.
Before you go to that sort of level of extreme intervention in officers' freedoms and privacy, I suppose it sort of goes back to the second part of my question, which was, how is the impact of this training being measured? Are you seeing people reporting stuff? Because actually, what's important is that people feel confident to call anything out that they notice that is racist, misogynist, homophobic.
I said earlier that we are seeing an increase in people coming forward, and sometimes that's to report things that have happened to them, but sometimes it's to report things that they have seen or heard of. And clearly Hotton was a horrific incident, but it came to light because the officer and the IPC recognised this. One officer came forward and spoke about the bullying that she was going through. So she trusted the organisation to come forward and do that. We're seeing more examples of that. Cigna is designed to give people the confidence to do that, and we are currently rolling out a very powerful video and audio which talks about some of the things that officers and staff in the organisation have suffered. And the reaction to it is very powerful from officers and staff who see it. And so the catchphrase that is being used, the logo is not in my Met. And a lot of people are now using that and adopting it because they want to root this out. So there's a lot of activity going on in this area, led in the main by a network of women. We've got a very vibrant he for she movement inside the organisation as well. And our Department of Media and Director of Media and Culture, Media and Communications, Media and Communications is pushing this powerfully inside the organisation as well.
So what you've already talked about Sigma, which is sort of brought forward by the network of women, which sounds like a really positive thing. Are there other steps that the Met is taking to assure itself that that bullying and harassment that has been identified through Operation Hotton is not more widely prevalent across the Met? And are you, for instance, seeing differences in different BCUs? Are you seeing areas where there's more reporting than others?
It's a very interesting question. The Commissioner has recently initiated effectively a BCU and OCU, so all units of the organisation, health check, where the leader of that part of the organisation, usually a chief superintendent or a civilian equivalent, has to produce a report which will then come to me to outline how they think the health, the ethical health of their part of the organisation is standing up. So looking at things like sickness, but also levels of stress, levels of retention, levels of misconduct, levels of overtime where people are working too many hours because they're trying to make up for the salary gap that they have by working overtime. And so a lot of different measures to see, can we identify where there are particular problems? And we can also add into that where we're seeing a higher proportion of Sigma reports coming in particular parts of the organisation. It's a bit early. It's too early for that. I don't want to promise something that hasn't happened yet, but that report will be required of all parts of the organisation, which will allow us to do a health check, and we will then be bringing in the leaders to get them to talk through what they're doing about it. We encourage through he for she and network of women all leaders of OCUs and BCUs to run anonymous surveys to bring out feelings from their officers and their staff. Now that is done more powerfully in some parts of the organisation than others, and we're determined that it gets done everywhere so that people have the freedom to say how they're feeling, and that we can then have local leaders act upon that. We're reinforcing the training to sergeants and inspectors in terms of their responsibilities. We are redoing our annual fitness assessment, not fitness in terms of physical, but their performance and development review is being re-established for officers and staff to give supervisors more face time with their officers so that they can actually find out how they are feeling, how they are doing, are they suffering any bullying, any harassment. This is the number one hot issue inside the organisation at this moment in time. And
you said it was a bit too early to sort of report back on the metrics, sort of how much the sort of different levels. Do you have a sense of when you will get to a point where you are able to report on this transparently, and also what actually will you be measuring and what will you be able to show through that?
Well, again, I don't want to overpromise. It's early days for this. We're looking to see if any other forces in the UK do this. I'm not sure we've found any yet. But the intent is that the BCU commander, just to take a BCU, will come forward with their pack. So there will be a format of things they've got to look at the stats in certain areas, and I've listed those. I won't repeat them. Come forward and then talk through how they think the health of their BCU is, what they're doing, and it's an opportunity for us to see, are they being active enough in this area? Is their senior management team being active enough in this area? I should say we're also looking at the use of information technology to see whether or not we can find a system that will help us identify potential threats. In other words, the list I talked about, are people working excessive overtime? Are they coming into the police stations at strange times when actually they're off duty? And why are they doing that? Are they coming in and using equipment, technology that they shouldn't be using when they're off duty? Are they looking at crime files, and we already have some of this, crime files that they shouldn't be looking at, they're not authorised to look at? We're looking, can we find some sort of guardian technology that will overarch the organisation to spot that sort of aberrant behaviour, link it with sickness, absence, etc., and see if we can not find a culprit, but at least have a look at a group of people who we just want to understand why they're behaving like that. I don't know if that exists anywhere else yet, but we're looking if we can to find something that will help us do that.
Well, certainly all of that sounds like the kind of work that can give Londoners trust and confidence in the police. And I think that the challenge for you is to find a way to communicate about it and to find a way to find the right things to be able to report on that really are demonstrably making that difference. I have one more question, which is sort of about the action that the Met has taken to ensure that officers who report offensive behaviour have the confidence to do so and are not fearful of repercussions from their colleagues. You described the team culture, and I'll just wrap in a second question with that, which is, no, I'll actually ask that to the Deputy Mayor. So just that question. Okay, so what we need to get to is a culture which celebrates when officers will come forward and say, I'm not happy with that behaviour. And I think we're getting there. I keep talking about them, but it's a very impressive outfit. The Network of Women is pushing that very, very strongly. So is He for She. You know, in many of these issues where it's sexist and misogynist issues, the solution lies with the men to challenge the behaviour of each other, to make it clear that it's not acceptable, sometimes at a relatively low level, and with just a word, or take somebody to one side and say, that's not right, not in my Met is what we want to see and hear more of. But if necessary, at a more serious level, so they can report to their supervisor, they can report to the Federation, they can report on the right line. They can use Signet if they want to, but that, as I said, is anonymous and won't get us to an exact case. It will alert us to a problem in an area, but it won't zero in on an exact case. But the point is we need to get to a culture where officers are less concerned about how everybody will think of them, because they then start to realise people will congratulate them for rooting out behaviour that we do not want. And that has to be celebrated. I have to say, one of the breaks on that, of course, is that when we do root people out and we get negative publicity as a result of it, officers look at that and go, well, look what's just happened there. Why would I want to initiate that? So we need to do more work, and it's not for anyone else to do, it's for us to do. We need to do more work with the media, with people such as yourselves, with opinion formers, to say, actually, yes, it's terrible that this behaviour has gone on, but at least they're not doing it anymore. And the organisation is, you know, every one of these out makes a better organisation. Absolutely, and that goes back to the defensiveness point that I raised earlier, that it's a question of finding a way to be able to communicate the success in rooting out the unacceptable behaviour, so that so that the organisation doesn't look defensive about it, but actually is clear that I think we're agreeing, but I mean, I would have to say, if you feel you're under attack, you get defensive. Of course, of course. So we need less of the binary and more of the, this is a problem for us all to fix. I mean, if we can have that big conversation with Londoners to really get to the bottom of the trust and confidence issues, you know, that, and Londoners and the Metropolitan Police can work together on that, that would be absolutely wonderful. Final question for the Deputy Mayor. Are you confident that the Met has the right people in place to support the people who are challenging inappropriate behaviour and reporting wrongdoing?
So, if I may, can I just come back to a couple of your questions, one of which is around social media. And I think, you know, the Metropolitan Police have put in place a policy. I've always said in terms of the policy around social media, of course, that's incredibly important, how social media is used and WhatsApp groups are used. However, it is a symptom, and it's a symptom, you know, solving what goes on WhatsApp, it will not solve the culture of the Met and some of the really difficult issues that there are within the Metropolitan Police. So actually some of these recommendations in and of themselves will not be the panacea that is needed. You really are, and the Deputy Commissioner has talked about this, you really are in a position where it is about raising standards, raising standards, improving standards, ensuring people can come forward, but also being very clear what the values are that you want to recruit and the values are that you will enhance and support within the Metropolitan Police. And that's a policing, national policing issue as well. In terms of, do I have confidence? Sorry, could you repeat your question?
Yes, are you confident the Met has the right people in place to support those who challenge inappropriate behaviour and report wrongdoing?
So my answer to that is that I've yet to see that that's the case in terms of really understanding what the impact is of those being able to be supported coming forward. We've got recommendations within the IOPC Operation Hotton report to ensure there is that support there. They've definitely got the structures in place. Are they the right people doing the right things? Of course, that there will be some very, very good people within the Met in supporting officers to come forward. The question for me is how consistent and widespread that is. And the only way that we'll be able to know that is by the metrics that we're talking about, which show the impact of that and that we can see the culture of the Met changing. Can I just also pick up on this issue about communication with Londoners? This, of course, is about communication with Londoners and engagement in with Londoners. But the question for me is, how does that communication happen and how does that engagement happen? Is it, let us tell you what we are doing, or is it, let us have this conversation and discussion, let us understand your lived experience as Londoners of the Metropolitan Police, let us listen and learn and change? That's the type of communication and engagement that we want to support and we want to see going forward. But we also need to make sure that the service that the Londoners receive is absolutely, and of course many officers are doing a fantastic job, but I hear from too many victims and too many Londoners and people from different communities that they don't feel confident to come forward, and when they do come forward they're not taken seriously enough and they don't feel that they're being listened to. I think one of the things in the second part, if we're going to come on to it from the independent inquiry into child sexual abuse, shows is that the voice of the victim is often not heard and people aren't being believed, and that is another important part of the change that we need to see. And I'm not suggesting that the leadership of the Metropolitan Police doesn't accept this as a change that needs to be seen in terms of the ability to support victims, understand victims, and make sure that their perpetrators are brought to justice. But we really need, that's going to be an important part of this journey in improving trust and confidence.
Thank you. Chair.
Thank you. Assembly Member Decide very quickly. I'm failing as a chair here, time-wise.
Chair. Deputy Commissioner, you talked about right line, which is the Met's internal whistleblowing system. But as I understand, usage of this system has dropped by 22% over the last 4 years, whereas in contrast, reports to the Crime Stoppers national whistleblowing system by Met officers have marginally increased. Is the declining use of the system a concern when you are seeking to encourage more people to come forward to report bad behaviour?
It is of concern. I have to say I don't recognise the figures you've got, and I'd like to see them because I have an increase in the use of right line. There's also an online, not very imaginatively called online right line, so that in other words they can use the phone or they can do it online. But I'm told of an increase in the usage of it.
Well, what I would suggest, bearing in mind time constraints, if you can write to us about, because I'll put this question to the Mayor as well and to the Commissioner. So basically, usage of the internal systems, and if officers are reporting their concerns via other systems, I think some sort of written data would be very helpful to this committee.
Happy to do that.
Thank you.
Very grateful for that. Thank you. And Assembly Member Duval.
Thank you very much, Chair. You alluded to earlier, it's a question to Sir Stephen House. Can you just explain what the risk management measures does the Met have in place to support officers in the front line, in particular in those roles that are assessed in carrying a greater risk of stress and trauma? If the job's not already stress and trauma for everybody, but, in terms of degrees.
Yeah, I think we've made a lot of progress on this in the last 5 years, and with help from the Mayor's budget, we've put a lot more money into these services. And as you'll probably be aware, one of the pillars within Met Direction is caring for each other. In other words, looking after officers and staff in the organisation when they have problems. So we've got a number of self-referral or managers supports us, and 24/7 helpline in relation to officers suffering from trauma, counselling services, support therapies, psychological monitoring. Managers have got access to dedicated specialist occupational health advice line. We've got an employee assistance programme helpline which can be accessed 24 hours a day, which obviously is important as far as 24 hours 7 service is concerned. There's a brief on that. A brief assessment is undertaken by clinical staff online, and if required, the individual making the call can be referred for further support, such as specialist counselling, or where necessary can be supported by facilitated referral into existing services such as a GP or into specialist organisations who will offer help for people suffering trauma, and we have a lot of connections with those people. Officers have got access to specialist counselling models in managing trauma such as trauma-focused cognitive behaviour therapy and eye movement desensitisation reprocessing therapy, which are two fairly well-known processes and tacked-in treatments within trauma. There's a psychological monitoring programme which allows for clinically approved psychological screening and assessment to be undertaken to identify if an officer or member of staff, bearing in mind we have members of staff who work in our explosives area and deal with suspect devices, not police officers mainly, but members of staff, just to identify if they are experiencing trauma, and that's sort of they get in front of a psychologist to do that. That can lead to a minimum of 6 counselling sessions and can be increased if necessary. Officers can access support from a range of internal peer support programmes, including Blue Light Champions, which are everywhere in the organisation. Trauma peer support programme presently being piloted on 5 BCUs, provides structured, trained, peer-led support. Often people would rather go to people that they know than talk to strangers on a phone. They'd rather talk to somebody, but we need these people to be trained and not just sort of giving bad advice. There's a management advice line as well, which can be accessed by line managers to contact occupational health, our own occupational health department, to gain specialist advice on behalf of staff. There's a lot. I haven't mentioned musculoskeletal. We've got a very good musculoskeletal referral service now as well, which is reducing our sickness because officers are getting and staff are getting early treatment. It's an area we've recognised. I think most IOPC reports, and I've no doubt the Casey report will talk about the corrosive nature of policing, particularly for operational officers. You just need to look at the number of assaults that people will probably know. I sign a statement for every officer who's assaulted in support of a prosecution case. I'm signing hundreds a week. The numbers are still going up. Officers are being assaulted more and more. Probably something to do with the deference of authority that I talked about earlier.
Okay. Let's look at some of that support that's offered by line managers. And I suppose, as you as a senior manager of the organisation, or one of the senior managers of the organisation, how do you assure yourselves that the Met has effective supervision and quality assurance in place for those officers on that line management? Because I suspect, we could go through and I think it's quite interesting, the comprehensive arrangements, but that front line of line managers. Yeah?
So we have I chair a People and Learning Board every 6 weeks, which looks at some of the occupational health issues, but we also have a Risk and Management Board that Robin Wilkinson chairs, and that also assesses where are we in terms of near misses for health and safety issues, and there's a report regularly to that. And it also looks at what access is happening to the counselling service. Because if officers aren't using them, then we won't keep paying for them, because obviously they come out of the budget. So we assess that, and we look at are there hotspots of where reports are coming in, again, from different BCUs or OCUs, to assess is there any particular issue there. So, is it, for example, happening a lot in an armed response unit, and have we got a particular problem there? Or is it that effectively just a response team has had a difficult set of nights, and the same officers have been to 5 suicides, or the Marine unit has picked up an excessive number of bodies from the Thames, and they pick up hundreds a year, sadly, of bodies in the Thames, and that's traumatic for them. So there's counselling there. We also, as you're probably well aware, have a force chaplain, a senior force chaplain, who spends 95% of his time, as far as I can see, going around the organisation, just talking to people to find out are there any issues. We have strong links with the Federation, who also have their own systems of referral, but we talk to the Federation also about any particular issues that they are concerned about.
Thank you.
Okay, Assembly Member Ahmed, did you still want your very... No, lovely, thank you. Right, that brings us to the end of that particular section. I am failing miserably as a chair, keeping us on time. Deputy Commissioner, do you want all the questions on this next section, which is child sexual exploitation, to go to the Commander? Yeah.
With your permission, yes.
No, that's fine.
Before we do, could I just mention, I've said on a number of occasions here that we'll write back. I am conscious that the last two that I've been to, there was a but you're not writing back quick enough. I am assured by our elite team who do these that we've responded to 104 requests for information from this group since the last time I think I was here. So we are I think, making inroads into the requests. But I acknowledge, we need to keep up the efforts.
We're horribly inquisitive. That's the point. What we'll do is, at the end of the meeting, we'll send a list of the things that we'd like, and it can be done together if you like. Okay, so we're now going on to this section. If you can keep your questions as brief as possible and answers, please. Starting off with Assembly Member Garrett.
Hello. Thank you, Chair, and I'd just like to acknowledge the Chair. Thank you for including this item on the agenda today after I raised it at the last meeting, and thank you to Commander Southworth for coming along. If I could start, so this is it was a national report, I should clarify, a national report into child sexual exploitation by organised networks, which is sort of following on the work of actually a different set of work by Dame Louise Casey. The report identifies, it only looked at one of the London boroughs at Tower Hamlets and a number of other places outside London. It identifies two cases of victim blaming. So this is which I raised at the last committee, where these children, young girls who are victims of abuse and exploitation, who then end up being charged by the system as perpetrators of some form of violence or retaliation or something like that against their abuser. And so I'm hoping you can tell us this morning that that is now a thing of the past and isn't happening.
Yes, thank you. There's been an extensive amount of work over the last couple of years. As you'll know, the report referred to instances between, I think, 2016 and 2019. As the new Commander for Public Protection, I can say that my predecessors have done some amazing work in this space over the last couple of years to maximise the training of our officers and staff across the organisation in order to move on from that culture, perhaps, of sometimes looking at things at face value and not considering what the underlying causes may be. Under our safeguarding strategy, which is extensive and varied in its approach to these things, we've rolled out many, many initiatives. I can outline some of them here today, mindful of time, if the Chair will indulge. We have a modern slavery and child exploitation team, which is a specialist team which delivers training through its vulnerability and assessment and partnership team, and has done to over 6,000 members of our officers and staff, and over 300 external partners, including social workers and other key partners, in order to help identify areas of child exploitation, including child sexual exploitation. There's a whole exhaustive toolkit which has been put online for all of our wider officers and staff to actually realise. Safeguard acronym, which obviously breaks down, I won't try and do all 9 letters of that, but it essentially talks about looking for the signs of what may be underlying causes or symptoms of child exploitation when dealing with young people who may come to police notice. The tracking of this through our performance metrics is already showing good dividends, so child criminal exploitation has absolutely surged in terms of its referrals now to over 1,000 sort of rolling year to date. Child sexual exploitation runs at about 500 rolling year to date at the moment. So we have a good identification of perhaps previously hidden harms, which we're now in a position to actually address jointly with partners, of course, because many of these, as you rightly identify, will not necessarily always lead to a judicial prosecution of some description, and actually a far better approach through diversionary tactics, safeguarding measures, protective security, and so on and so forth. There have been a whole host of initiatives with partners in the community, Operation Make Safe, Operation C-Scale. If these mean nothing to you, we can certainly write to you separately, and I'm conscious of time. But these are initiatives where our officers and staff are going out to hotels, businesses, even businesses such as sex work in the streets, where we're actually trying to identify where the vulnerable may be that are not necessarily immediately evident, and how to help partners in the community and business owners to identify where those people at risk may be and then flag that to us. So this is all helping to drive up that awareness. We have a new initiative called Operation Aegis. I say new, it's been about 12 months now. It's rolled across 5 BCUs already. It's going to do all the BCUs within the next 18 months. A 20-strong surge team capability going in to look at 6 areas, all of which relate in some way to vulnerability, but particularly to vulnerability around children, exploitation and child sexual exploitation, where again we're skilling up officers and staff to conduct these investigations in the most ethical way, looking at the full rounded panoply of measures that we might be able to utilise to ensure the right outcome for children brought to our attention rather than just prosecution. I'm mindful of time, so perhaps I'll draw that there, but I'm happy to explore any of those in further detail.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, that's all. It's very positive, and in particular, I suppose you've spoken at a sort of high level. How are you making sure that the approach that officers have is seeing those children as victims, because sometimes they cannot present necessarily as a stereotypical victim. I appreciate that.
Yes.
One of the case studies in the report is of a girl who fought off her attacker with a knife and then was convicted of a knife charge, and the claim in the report was that the man who was assaulted by her, who'd attempted to assault her, wasn't prosecuted. So in terms of a very tangible example, in that kind of situation, how do officers make sure that doesn't happen, that a girl fighting off a man with a knife, that we're seeing that she's probably not the perpetrator?
Indeed. It's very hard to comment on those individual circumstances without me having full access to the evidence in that particular case. But certainly we're aware, and our officers are trained in recognising the symptoms of things like gaslighting, where a suspect will try to actually blame the victim and reinterpret the events to make it look like there's culpability there, when in fact they're the one responsible. And that's all part of the training package that we drive out. In fact, only yesterday, I was addressing a 200-strong team of public protection experts up at Hendon, where we were talking about exactly this and ranging across these issues. Pardon me. If I'm talking of a very recent example which might provide, I hope, a helpful contrast, on Monday you might have heard there was a fantastic conviction at Snaresbrook Crown Court where 2 older gentlemen who've been routinely targeting young ladies about the age of the same victims and vulnerable individuals in the Tower Hamlets reporting were convicted of multiple offences, including rape, in exactly this situation where they'd identified vulnerable youngsters, manipulated them, coerced them and cajoled them into believing something that wasn't true, and then ultimately have received a 25-year sentence, and the officers involved have got judges' commendations for that. So it's an isolated example, but as a polarised opposite to what you're referring to there, I just thought it might be a helpful contrast to show just how much thought is being put into what sounds like a fairly similar situation, but resulted in a very different outcome for the suspects.
That's good to see. I mean, and the other issue, you mentioned gaslighting, the other issue is sometimes those girls don't see themselves as victims, they see themselves as a girlfriend, let's say, which as an outside observer you would see is not the case. One of the other issues in the report was about child abduction warning notices being used effectively as a kind of dispersal measure. I think probably the diplomatic way of putting it. Is that something that's still happening, and what is the view of using that tool against the girls themselves effectively to kind of disperse them from each other?
Yeah, I mean, there's 2 different types of child abduction warning notices, you probably know, under different sections of the Act, and one of which will probably be the most applicable here, is when we seek to use it as a way of stopping things like county lines trafficking. So we see an adult who's got a youngster seemingly in their charge or under their influence who may be need warning off in that way, to use that expression, to have a child abduction warning notice served against them. So they can have great utility. There is another one about a separate section, you probably know, about children who have a care order against them. But speaking specifically to this, that is one of a toolkit which is available to our officers, which is not confined solely to corns, as you know, if I can call them that. There are also other things, as you know, sexual health prevention orders, criminal behaviour orders. There are a range of judicial restrictions, as we refer to them, which are hugely, hugely important to our officers and staff. Skilling up in training and investing in our officers to understand all of this is really important, because there's complex legislation behind each of these different orders, and they are extremely varied. I know myself from previous experience of charging brothel closure orders, for instance, the law around them can be very vexed indeed, but they're all useful in their own way, and corns have their place. I wouldn't be able to tell you right here, right now, exactly how many we have had in place recently, but I can get that material for you if you would help.
I think that would be useful. I mean, I think what the report highlights is that it potentially ends up criminalising the... I mean, I hear what you're saying, that you want to you want to stop them associating with the person who is controlling or abusing them, but I think what the report flagged up was that they're potentially being used against the children themselves as a way of kind of dispersing them from each other. And you can see how that would be an attractive option, but it appears to then involve criminalising those young people.
I can see that.
So if you could write to us about what's going on with that and whether there's been a change since the report, that would be very useful.
So, thank you.
I think the HMI report inspection found significant weaknesses then with online investigations, because obviously not all of this type of crime is happening as an in-person crime. Sometimes there's an online aspect. What actions are the Met taking to address that side of the problem?
But an exhaustive investment recently in online child sex abuse and exploitation. I think this evidence might have appeared before this committee before, so I hope I'm not repeating something that members are already aware of. But certainly there's been an investment in OXE, online child sex abuse and exploitation teams on each BCU. Those are strong teams of sort of 1 and 6 dedicated to looking at how we investigate at a local level those referrals. In terms of detecting it, which I think is the thrust of your question, if I may, sir, is very much a reliance on colleagues at the National Crime Agency and also some international partners and big tech companies themselves. Much like we've done in my previous life in counter-terrorism, we engage with this array of partners to look at big data sets, engagement with the big tech providers, much as Mr. Desai was saying about before with big tech. And actually we utilise these fantastic partnerships to identify referrals to us. Those referrals come in some number, so they run currently at about sort of 280 to 300 a month to indecent imagery of children and child sex abuse online referrals, and they are tackled by these OXE teams at a local level. The more serious and significant, where we believe there may be contact offending or higher risk, are dealt with by a dedicated specialist team on a central specialist crime. And again, that team is adept at rooting out, if I can call them that, the paedophiles within our midst and the networks that might serially exploit and bring into real-world contact youngsters with offenders in this space.
Okay, the other, another concern, I think it was recommendation 5 from sorry, jumping back to the IICSA report, was about the data that's being recorded. And in particular, it found that the overwhelming majority of cases, ethnicity, for example, of the victim isn't recorded, by the police. And that creates two problems. One is that it identified a sort of lack of cultural sensitivity sometimes, where the victim may not be white, they may have particular sort of cultural issues around the crime that they've suffered. And obviously there's a long-standing issue, which the report again repeats, where there's a sort of ethnic element to the offending, or to some aspects of the offending, that sometimes generates a lot of sensitivity, not to rehash the Chair's comments earlier. And I can't understand why. We seem to be decades into this, looking at this problem. Why is it that I think 86% of victims don't have their ethnicity recorded? And I wondered why that was, whether that's normal if you compare it to other crime types. Let's say, I don't know, children arrested for shoplifting, or people arrested for burglary. Is that a normal level of not recording that? And if not, what's going on?
I don't believe so. If we consider other areas of recording, whether it's crime recording or stop and search, that data is usually routinely tracked. Forgive me, I haven't seen that statistic, so I'll have to take your word for it on the basis of what you have for you there.
Yeah.
And I'd have to look at the forms, in fairness, because obviously we have the National Referral Mechanism form, we have the form 87A, which is the child coming to police notice. We have different mechanisms for recording these instances where children are brought to our notice in this way. And ultimately, we'd have to look and say, well, is that tick box somehow being missed? Is it not significantly prominent enough within the report that people are noticing it? I certainly wouldn't subscribe to or encourage anyone else to draw a connection between the fact that there's a low level of recording in that space and it somehow reflects a hidden agenda around diversity. I don't think that is the case. It's probably more, sadly, a fact of poor record keeping or data management. But certainly with the Op Aegis initiative, which I mentioned before, and the training going out to our officers and staff in such volume via the VAT, I'm confident that will be addressed, because if we're training 6,000 people and we have 350 specialist modern slavery investigators, we have any number of other initiatives underway, I'm confident that record keeping will improve with those sort of investments of people.
Yeah, I mean, it says, I'm happy that you would look at it. It says that for the 2019 profile, 86% of offenders involved in 147 reports of child sexual abuse, and 14% of 166 victims in the central area BCU. So it's, I mean, as I say, there's no explanation for it. I suppose what I would say is some of the problems we've spoken about this morning are quite complex and difficult. Organisational cultural change is difficult. Recording a piece of information is really easy. So I'm hoping you can write to me or write to all of us explaining, how that's being tackled, because it does seem an extraordinary oversight, given that this has been a big issue with this particular type of crime for a very long time. Finally, if I can ask the Deputy Mayor, in relation to this type of crime, both the online child sexual exploitation and the sort of grooming gang sexual exploitation, are you confident that the Mayor's new plan for policing and crime is sufficiently robust to tackle the problems?
Thank you. It's one of the things that, having read the report and also looking back over the years that I've been doing oversight around child protection, it's one of the things in terms of finalising the police and crime plan, because obviously we finished the consultation, we're now finalising. It's one of the things that I'll be looking at. But it is also one of the areas that I've been concerned about for a number of years in terms of networks of groups of people, not necessarily gangs in the way that we understand gangs of London when we talk about gangs in relation to violence and drugs, although they may be connected, really understanding those networks. And when I read this report, it really did make me feel concerned again around how much do we know, what are the intelligence systems showing us. And it's something that I'm chairing a meeting of the Child Protection Oversight Group. I think it's next week, and this report is on the agenda to have a discussion around, well, what lessons can we learn from this, what more needs to be done, and then of course we'll make sure that we pick up any lessons into the police and crime plan.
Thanks. I look forward to hearing the result of that. I suppose I would just close by observing that it feels like, as I said last time, it feels like we're a very long time into this exposing of this type of crime, and it's a bit frustrating that the conversation around it feels like very early days. But I take your point, and I look forward to hearing the positive outcome. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. If it's of any assistance, it's on page 101, because I picked up on it as well, and it was really looking into Tower Hamlets. As you know, this report did. In fact, it's a worrying report that we've read. Now we're going to Assembly Member Best.
Thank you, Chair. Assembly Member.
Yeah,
sorry, Chair, can I just follow up very quickly on the previous Assembly member's contribution?
Yeah.
Look, I recognise that both politically and professionally that we've put a lot of effort here, but from 2016, increasingly so, and the last report of 2021 carried out the inspection in 2020, over 70%, well, just under 70% of our cases were inadequate or not, what's your words you use? You've got requiring improvement, and we're inadequate. Now, I know that we've made progress, but it does seem to me that that progress isn't significant if we think about, I don't want to be emotional about it or rant, because I do know the efforts that you've put in to get this right and that. But it does seem to me still too high in 2021, which goes back to the previous Assembly member's comments, that we don't seem to be, this is not new. We've had task force. You, Deputy Mayor, have spent lots of time on this. What is it that we need to do to get this, reduce this? I call it 70%, you call it 68%. It's not quibble about 2%. But to get that down, because that's actual real cases and victims that we're letting down. So what else do we need to do? What's new? Or is it more of the same that's going to do that? And am I, in a year's time, or in future administrations, going to be coming back and 70% is roughly always where we're going to be with not very good casework?
Thank you, Mr. Duval. I was just looking very slightly. I was slightly confused for a moment about exactly which crime type you were referring to. Do you mean child sexual exploitation specifically, or more broadly public protection matters?
I'm talking about the inspector's report of 20...
Your microphone, then.
I'm talking about the inspector's report of 2021, which was conducted in 2020, of where you audited 170 child protection cases, where you found actually 32% were graded good, which is good. That's where we want to be, to 37% were requiring improvement, that's where we don't want to be, and 31% were inadequate.
Thank you. And it is a slight variance, I think, on the theme we've been discussing, which is about child sexual exploitation.
But I'm talking. Look, I'm going back here. I mean, I think it's important child exploitation, but actually, I'm talking about the performance of the Met overall in this area. This is not good enough, despite our efforts. I say that collectively. I don't want to beat you over the head.
No.
I know what you've been doing. You've told us and given us regular report backs, but it's just not where we want to be.
No, and I do agree, and I'm sure my colleagues, officers and staff alike, would agree that child safety is absolutely paramount. The most youngest and most vulnerable members of our community demand the most protection, of course, and everyone here agrees with that. The reason I differentiated apologies is that in terms of child sexual exploitation, I'm reliably informed that the last review did say there were no recommendations. So the good news story I was relaying a moment ago to Mr. Garrett about that has resulted in a significant improvement in HMIC's most recent review to show that in CSE terms there are no further recommendations to make, which is good news following the Tower Hamlets findings of some years ago. More broadly, child protection as a whole, very significant challenges there. We recognise that volume has continued to rise. We have had some challenges along the way in terms of my predecessors in role have addressed this in terms of the transition in the organisational structure, but at the same time there's a MASH review ongoing at the moment, as you may be aware, nationally led by ACC Rachel Jones, which is looking at our multi-agency safeguarding hubs. We're watching that, of course, with keen interest. MASH is central to how we manage risks to children and, of course, really the filter, aren't they, in the first instance between the multi-agency, including police, processing of child referral notices to us. And then ultimately that starts the chain effectively, doesn't it, towards when we full child protection orders and so on and so forth. In terms of the resourcing of our units, we actually have more people in post now than we had 2016, pre the BCU mergers, looking at child abuse. I think that evidence has been given here before, so apologies for repeating it. We are very aware of the need to skill up, and that's what Operation Aegis is doing differently. So it started, as I say, in March 2021. We've done 5 BCUs so far. We are seeing the green shoots of improvement across child abuse there in terms of lifting the quality of our child protection capabilities. We also have enhanced training now in terms of the Serious Child Abuse Investigation Development Programme. I think it's been raised here previously that there was quite a low number of people trained in that. It is a very specialised course, requires continued accreditation. That's been lifted by March this year. We'll have 179 people trained and wending their way through to what will be a very impressive level of accredited officer by hopefully later this year, which will help to not only investigate the most serious offences against children, but support the overall effort of public protection and child abuse investigation. I am, for my part, new in post, as you know. This is day 3 for me, but at the same time, I don't use that as an excuse. I've been reading into this exhaustively. My lead responsible officer, Ian Keating, is a detective superintendent with many years, in fact, nearly 2 decades, I think, of child abuse investigative experience, and we're working together on this with all of our partners to see if we can drive through Aegis and through the different improvements I mentioned today, an improvement in child safety across the city, recognising the recent findings in Star Hobson, Arthur Labinio Hughes, and the other terrible cases we've seen nationally, which we don't want to see repeated ever again.
Could I just add, I share your frustration, Len, in terms of the pace of change and the progress, because the HMIC, as it was then, published the first report in 2016, November 2016 it was published, and it's a long way since that, it's a long time has passed since then, and it still isn't good enough, but it has progressed, and I don't think we should overlook the improvements that have been made. It doesn't mean that there's a lot more that does need to be made. For me, it's about not just increasing, sustaining the focus on this. And that was one of the key things from the original HMIC report, was about leadership and focus. And there is leadership and focus on this. Assistant Commissioner Nick F. chairs the Public Protection Board. He has an absolute focus on this. But there does also need to be investment in. Commander Southwell was quite right to point to Operation Aegis. That started in Croydon and Sutton and has been proven to be very successful. However, it is a moment in time. It moves on. And we've got to make sure that there is the investment to sustain it and go back, because people change, as we know. As we know, if you sat on this committee, you see a lot of different faces. And we need to make sure that that is continual improvement. And for me, that's going to be really key, that we continue to invest in Operation Aegis, not just for the one-off, go round all the BCUs, but go round again and keep that focus. And then, when I read the ICSA report, I did feel very, very concerned, because it's one of the questions that I have consistently asked is, what don't we know? Where are these networks? I can't believe this isn't happening in London if it's happening outside London. We have all the characteristics which would mean it'll be somewhere. The other thing I think that needs to happen is making the connections between the different parts of the Metropolitan Police and the different units, from the gangs unit to the serious organised crime unit, making those connections so that Child First is always there to look at the child protection issues, to look at the issues around violence against women and girls, for example, because often this, not always, often this is girls, and making those connections, and those are certainly something that we've been discussing.
Thank you. Assembly Member Best.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Commander, for the earlier answers. You talked about the training which has been rolled out for 6,000 members of staff, and obviously we're short on time, but I'd love to see more details of that, if that could perhaps be provided, and what that training entails. On the theme of, I feel like the question that's been asked many times, you know, talking about progress, and I've certainly seen this on the other side, being in a local authority, and here again, the question I was going to ask for both the Deputy Mayor and for you, Commander, was what steps are you taking to work with other agencies, such as local authorities, to improve the way data and I suppose information about families as well is being shared?
In terms of, I mean, I chair the Child Protection Oversight Group. It isn't a Met-only group. We have a representative from London Councils. Actually, the Director of Children's Services, Sir Tal Hamlet, sits on the group, and that is a partnership group, because you're absolutely right, and your experience is right that this isn't just an issue for the Metropolitan Police, and also the ICSA report makes that very clear. So this is a borough issue where there are responsibilities around safeguarding. So we all have to be working together to improve this. The other thing that I think needs to happen is, the other thing that we do in terms of the role of MOPAC, we support and are part of the Child Safeguarding Board at Pan London, looking at safeguarding and child protection across London. That will continue to be an important role that we play. And of course, again, going back to Assembly Member Garrett's question, the Police and Crime Plan has as one of its priorities protecting people from harm and protecting the vulnerable from harm. This is a key aspect of it. This, the vulnerable, very much children and young people, and how we must make sure that that part of the Police and Crime Plan picks up the lessons from ICSA, picks up the lessons from the work that has happened already, and focuses down on what needs to happen, but also, and really importantly, what the metrics are. It's a difficult one to be able to assess impact. A lot of it's qualitative rather than quantitative.
Thanks. Just to come back specifically on data, and a lot of the issues can sometimes be faced around not knowing the right person to speak to, or GDPR being, some people are overly concerned about that, and just IT systems not talking to each other, something as simple as that. So to what level can you impact on helping to improve that?
I think that's more for Commander Southworth, actually.
I'm happy to try and help with that, if I may, Assembly Member Best. I think the multi-agency panels that we have, and there's a range of these, as you know, that look at different aspects of, if we're talking about child safety, it could be a GMAP, a gangs multi-agency panel, which I used to chair at Westminster myself. It could be a multi-agency public protection process. It could be a MACE meeting, a multi-agency child exploitation meeting. We have an array of these. And whenever you see those magic letters, MA, it's always a good thing, I think, because it means that all the different agencies, as you know, are going to get around the table and compare specific tactical data sets on individual people who have come to notice and are at risk. And that's absolutely necessary and enshrined, as you know, in our statutory partnerships to be able to say we can legitimately do that. Just your point around GDPR and people being overly concerned, I share your sentiment because it frustrates me as well and has in the past. We will have, as you know, information sharing agreements which will be checked legally by all agencies to make sure that we're not oversharing information that might be private, especially if it's medical or has restrictions around it, because there has to be a balance, doesn't there, between how much we share and how much is actually straying into people's privacy and their private lives. So those multi-agency panels enable us to take those shackles off a little bit and work because we have specific tactical reason to say we need to compare notes on this individual because of A, B and C, and we all pool our information. More broadly, we try to do that as best we can, but we just have to be mindful of those legal barriers. I don't think perhaps overly concerned is the right expression, because, not to pick up on your wording and split hairs, but people are genuinely concerned about privacy, and we need to be mindful of that as whole part of the confidence and consent piece. But we do have very effective multi-agency panels that are able to do that critical information sharing where it needs to be around individual cases. In a utopia, from a police officer's point of view, I'm sure from some partners in the room as well, we'd pool all data, of course, from all data sets, from all different agencies, and then employ some spider-like algorithm which would climb over the top of it and pick out the risk for us, and we could all probably sit back and just wait for the results to come to us, as you know, and as I do too. That's not actually the utopia that we might reach anytime soon because of legal restrictions around data sharing, but I hope that answers the question to the best I can.
Yeah, I wonder as well, that it's helpful, but especially on the multi-agency panels, how much you're making sure there's a whole family approach when you come across these cases and look at the data.
A whole family approach around, so an individual comes to notice, and we then review the whole family situation around them. I've yet to get under the bonnet of this because I'm only 3 days in post, but we did used to have the Troubled Families programme. Sophie, I don't know if we still have that, the Family Recovery Programme after that, which looked at that very issue in terms of the rounded approach to families. I would have to see where we are with that nowadays. But in terms of the individual panels themselves, tactically we do try to take into account lateral circumstances around individuals. Sorry, do you want to...
I mean, I don't know if this helps, but I'm just reading through the brief I have here, and we'll need to give you more detail because it's a generalist comment, but the NPS has recently developed and released a regular and comprehensive data set in relation to intrafamilial child abuse for use by partners. It provides borough-level information about crime types, trends, outcomes and performance, and will provide partnerships with the opportunity to overlay agency data to jointly tackle local and London-wide issues concerning child sexual abuse. Sounds like the sort of thing that it's a start on it, at least. We can let you know more about that, because I haven't got any more detail on it here.
Certainly sounds like a start, but I'd be lying if I said I completely comprehended it from that, read that, but it sounds a lot on the right tracks.
I think what it's basically saying is we are pulling our information together and we're making it available to partners at a borough level. So that, because one of the issues, of course, is we have BCUs that have got multi-boroughs on them, so a lot of it is disaggregating it for us down to borough level now, providing borough level information about what crime types are taking place and what families, trends and outcomes and performance, and they can then add to that. It may be a start. We can look at that and write about it if you wish.
Thanks. For you, Deputy Mayor, I think you did cover this in your previous answer, but just if you wanted to add anything on the steps MOPAC are taking to improve specifically monitoring of child safeguarding.
Yeah, I mean, it's our role on the London Child Safeguarding Board. Just going back to your question about data and sharing of data, I think it's one of those wicked issues, and it has become more difficult, and there has been a chill because of the GDPR and all those regulations. However, I think there's, one of the roles of MOPAC, and one of the things that I do is I have actually been lobbying the policing minister around data, because I think that it should always be dare to share, and it should, if there's any cases, it's always about data and it's always about the sharing of information, isn't it? So any chill that has gone into the system, there is a job of work, not just for the Metropolitan Police to be able to share data and to empower and to be confident about the sharing of data, but there's also actually a job of work for government, job of work for the Information Commissioner's Office to be much more proactive in supporting and empowering the sharing of data when it's appropriate. So that chill does go. Some boroughs are very, very good at it, and MOPAC actually funded Hillingdon to a programme which they still use around the sharing of data for vulnerable children. Really, really good programme, and that it's not just around child protection; it's around violence as well. Really good programme of sharing of data where they are doing that in order to be able to protect people.
Thanks. Was there anything on monitoring, or because it was kind of covered earlier?
Well, I mean, in terms of the police and crime plan and the monitoring that we do publish quarterly performance reports around the data that we have around offences, around child sexual abuse and sexual exploitation. So we will continue to monitor that. We'll look at, through the police and crime plan, what metrics we need to put in place.
Thank you. And finally, to both of you, perhaps you first, Deputy Mayor, what's your response to the failings in Tower Hamlets identified in the IICSA's recent findings about child exploitation in organised networks? And do you believe these reflect child safeguarding across the Met? I know Assembly Member Garrett touched on it as well.
I'm not sure I have much more to add in terms of what I've said around the lessons that we need to learn from ICSA, that this, Tower Hamlets themselves have improved, and they've recently improved in terms of, because this was from 2016 to 2019, but I don't want to, that makes it sound like, well, everything's moved on. Everything hasn't moved on, and there still needs to be progress, but there has been improvements from Tower Hamlets, the borough, as well as from the Metropolitan Police as well. But again, what I am doing is it's on the agenda for next week's Child Protection Oversight Group to look at what else we need to be doing, so that I probably could give you a more detailed answer at the next PCC, or I'm very happy to get back to you on that.
I think that would be helpful for PCC. Obviously, I don't sit on this committee, but it's no more after. And Commander, is there anything you wanted to say on that?
To be fair, we have covered some of this already, so I won't repeat, but the one recommendation for the police in that report was, I believe, about police forces and local authorities collecting data, which cleaves to your previous point, of course, around data, so I won't revisit that, other than to say that in addition to what I said earlier about Aegis, about crime recording, comments explored with Mr. Garrett about recording standards, there's also, of course, our Spot It to Stop It campaign, which has been rolling since 2017, which incorporates all elements of encouraging frontline officers and staff to identify and bring these things to the fore. I think for me, putting it in a nutshell, until we ever get to that utopia where we have the big data sets, the dare to share approach, and we're able to use modern technologies in the non-Betamax way that we would like to, in order to properly identify risk in all its forms, and we can actually get some way with that with our work with big tech partners, because I've done it in previous roles that I've been in. I think we are going to continue to be reliant on individual practitioners, both officers, staff and partners alike, to identify risks, bring them to those multi-agency meetings and manage through that. But the encouraging thing, as per my earlier, is the number of referrals is on the rise across the board there. So that is a good sign, because we're identifying previously hidden harms.
Okay, I'm sure we're all pleased to hear about Tower Hamlets improving, because obviously it features in this report, and not always in a good way. Very, very quickly, whenever I've done agency work, the one partner that won't come to the table is health. Is that still the same situation, or has it improved? Just has it or not is fine. Deafening silence.
I'm afraid I wouldn't want to comment on that without checking the recent statistics about attendance at all the various meetings. It'd be wrong of me to do so.
It was dire when I was involved. Everybody else came to the table, but health.
I think that has improved quite substantially. Genuinely think that's improved. Great. And London, it's certainly improved in terms of violence reduction. You can see that through. I mean, I know it's a different issue to child protection. Well, it's not. It's very linked actually. But they have a clinical director for reduction of violence. It has improved. It doesn't mean there's more improvements to be made. But yeah, I think things have moved on.
Good. Well, yes, good. I'm pleased about that. Assembly Member Desai.
Thank you, Chair. And I'm conscious of the time, but I do have 4 questions to put to you, Commander. Both you and the Deputy Mayor have talked about Operation Aegis. Now, as I understand, this started in April 2021. It's a 2-year pilot project, so we're coming up to the end of year 1. But the information I have is that the Inspectorate update report said that the cases and incidents it reviewed in the pilot area did not show any better investigative results than in other areas. What are you going to say about this, and how do you intend monitoring the performance of Operation Aegis as it is rolled out across London?
And I should say it is not an operational inject of capability, it is about training and uplifting standards. So the Aegis construct basically is a team of about 20 people which go into a BCU for about 14 weeks at a time, so about 3 months, work alongside the officers and staff in dedicated public protection departments across 6 themes, which are RASO, domestic abuse, child abuse investigation, child exploitation, child sexual exploitation, and one other, which MISPERS, thank you, it almost escaped me. So you can see they've got quite a lot to do in a short space of time to get alongside the teams and uplift their standards and capability. The first borough was only done at April 21st, April 21, and obviously had a 3-month run. So we'll need to look at this in the long run about how it improves standards across the organisation, but it will be qualitatively reviewed as time goes on. It's a little early to say definitively that it's going to be the game changer that we'd like it to be, but we've still got 7 BCUs to go, and we're rolling out steadily one by one.
Keep us informed as and when substantial progress takes place. Then coming back to Tower Hamlets again, the report states that the Metropolitan Police Service told us that there were no cases or issues with child sexual exploitation by networks in Tower Hamlets using the inquiry's definition. Can you confirm if there are networks in Tower Hamlets you're aware of, and whether it is just a case that you're recording this matter in a different way using organized criminal gang terminology.
I'm afraid I'd have to come back to you on that because it's a tactical. Okay. You mean right now here today? That sounds like an operational question about networks that might be live and active in a BCU as we sit here. So I should really check that and come back to you separately.
Can also just confirm what Deputy Mayor said about harmless progress is being made. And two more questions. The report also criticised how timeless police dealt with reports that children were missing children. Can you assure this committee that such reports will be prioritised and followed up across the Met? Yes or no answers first?
Yes.
Fine, great. And my final question, what work, this is about intervention opportunities to both of you very briefly, what work is being done to raise awareness, identify and implement intervention opportunities to prevent child exploitation?
I won't, forgive me, I won't repeat many of the things I've said earlier about Aegis and about recognising the signs, because I believe I've covered that probably reasonably comprehensively in other questions here today. Just some elements of things which would definitely help in this instance, and we talked about missing persons a moment ago. If you take our Philomena and affinity protocols, what we're trying to do there, and I've largely succeeded in doing, is filtering out the sometimes demand exhaustive inquiries around missing persons, which are not necessarily missing persons that demand police action. They're people who've gone repeatedly missing and usually return back to their care institutions quite quickly. But the reason I referenced that, and that's been reduced from about 28,000 a year to about 25,000 a year now, which is really helpful because it takes pressure off our teams, enables us to focus on the risk. And this is a continued theme, Mr. Desai, across the different areas of public protection, domestic abuse, online child sex abuse and others, which is to ethically reduce demand while enabling us to focus our resources on those higher risk instances where we believe young people are going missing from care or missing from home and are actually at risk, which combined with the Spot It to Stop It campaign, the Operation Aegis work and the partner work will hopefully bring those that are most at risk to the fore so we can identify them. And the Safeguard acronym I referred to before is not a meaningless mnemonic. It is about encouraging all officers to look for all those signs, everything from sexual behaviours to distrust of authority, truancy from school, to make sure that our officers know when they come across young people, these signs may indicate that this young missing person, this young person who's come to notice for antisocial behaviour, is actually potentially at risk of child abuse or exploitation. So it's that sort of cultural shift at the front line that we're driving through.
Deputy Mayor, have you got anything to add to that?
The only thing I would add is the only thing I would add is this issue about voice of the child and putting the children first and really listening to the victim, and that is something that is in train. It needs to improve, and you can see that from ICSIN, you can see that from the HMIC reports as well. But actually, the ability to hear the child and to see the victim, and going back to some of the questions that Assembly Member Garrett posed around, not mistaking the victim for the perpetrator. That is a work in progress, and I think that is going to make a big difference.
Thank you. And Chair, I was going to ask a question about ethnicity or the lack of recording of ethnicity of perpetrators, but Assembly Member Garrett has already asked that. I just want to say I share his concerns, because if we don't talk about such issues openly, transparently, then the wrong people will set the narrative, as we know too well from cases in the north of England in particular.
Yeah, I intend to just mention that at the end. Assembly Member Pigeon.
I had a long list of questions, but I'm not going to be asking you those today. But what I do want to pick up, Commander, you're new in your role. So what plans do you have for carrying out dip sampling of cases, given the HMI we had coming in every quarter, carrying out samples of well over 100 cases, looking at what was working and what wasn't working? Are you planning to do something similar to inform your work?
Yes, thanks to my predecessor, actually, Commander Dales, we have a rolling programme of dedicated inspections. So there is a DIT team, a dedicated inspection team, which works to my leadership as the chair of the Public Protection Delivery Group, which looks at different thematics every month. So, for instance, child sexual exploitation comes around every 6 months, goes into the data set and actually looks at dip sampling and, of course, data quality, including recording standards across the piece to ensure and satisfy and reassure us that we're actually getting our practices correct in all these different areas. So there's like a clock face of different public protection themes, and the DIT will go in under the auspices of the Public Protection Delivery Group, reporting for instance, child matters to the London Child Protection Improvement Oversight Group, which the Deputy Mayor chairs, and that way we give the reassurance to partners as well that we're actually have a really rigorous regime in place so that we're ready and irregardless of, I suppose, HMIC inspections, making sure that we're doing the right thing fundamentally by the community first and foremost.
Are you able to share with us your latest dip sampling so we can see whether there has been improvement?
I believe we probably can. If I may, I'll go and check what the most recent one was.
Assembly Member Ahmed, did you still want to come in briefly?
No, thank you, Chair. My question's been answered.
Thank you. So that just leads me to say, and I'm concerned about this obviously, the report stated, and I'm quoting, the fear of being seen as racist may have hindered the detection and intervention in some cases of child sexual exploitation throughout the country for a number of years. Has this been an issue with the Met and local partners? And if so, what are you doing to support officers to investigate potential crimes without fear or favour? And we all know it is a real thing. Who'd like to answer that one?
I'm happy to. I think we recognise and acknowledge the findings of the report, and I think that seems to be incontrovertible in relation to what Professor Jay and others have found. I think some of this comes down to moral courage, doesn't it, in terms of senior investigating officers and senior police leaders. I've never knowingly backed away from an investigation on the grounds of race or anything else or any other protected characteristic. And I don't know any other senior officers in my company over my years of service who would do so either. That said, I'm not refuting what the ICSA panel have found. All I would say is going forward, it's not something I recognise that in myself or others. I think we routinely chase down organised criminal networks of all ethnicities and demographics, and I don't necessarily see that as being true today, even if it was a few years ago.
There is a fear, though. There is no doubt about it. As politicians, we all know there is a fear because it's one of the worst things that anybody can accuse you of. Therefore, I'm worried that given the latest comments that have been made about the Met, that it might put in another fear. And that really genuinely worries me because we need to be speaking out without worry.
I won't elongate, but I agree with what you say, Chair. I don't disagree with my colleague at all. I think it's easy for detective superintendents and deputy commissioners and commanders to say, "Well, you know, I'm going to." There is no doubt that operational officers are sensitive to and nervous about asking about ethnicity when they do various stops and checks. If we require them to do it, they prefer not to, because they know it sometimes causes problems. And that's something we have to get over, because it's not right. You used the phrase moral courage, you're quite right. We need to get past that. Officers need to understand these are essential requirements, because it is hard to fathom that we don't have the same sort of problems that have existed in other parts of the country as, I can't remember who it was, but somebody referred to. I think that's almost certain that we do. So we do need to push through this. But I also understand the sensitivity that officers, operationally tactical officers, have. It's easy for people like me to have that moral courage. It's not so easy on the street when you're going to get a smack in the face if you do it.
No, and we need to support those officers in that case. And I think the recent findings will make it even more difficult for some of them, which is a shame. Well, that brings us to the end of that section, and I'm sure, Commander Southworth, we wish you well in your new position. It's a very difficult area, and those of us that have read this report are obviously concerned, as I'm sure you are. So, I'd like to thank our guests for attending this morning and for their answers to our questions. Thank you all. Can I ask the committee to note the report, the discussion, and the monthly report received from MOPAC? Thank you. Can we also delegate authority to me as chairman in consultation with party group lead members to agree any output arising from the meeting? Thank you. And I will ask that we send a list of the things to come back, because I appreciate it went on and on, so apologies for that. Can I ask the committee to agree the response to the Mayor's Draft Police and Crime Plan 2021 to 2025? Thank you. Can I ask the committee to note the work programme and additional activity undertaken as listed on the agenda? Thank you. And in accordance with Standing Order 2.2d, to assist the conduct of business, I will now move on to items 10 and 11. So 10 is the next meeting of the committee is scheduled for the 9th of March 2022 at 10 a.m. And I have no other urgent business, so we will go into our private session now.